Okay, another crack at this. This is about my album Holiday in Hollywood, my first LP. After I'd recorded my first song under my own name, Richard Stepp, it was called Chasing a Dream, and it was produced by Darryl B., who was a DJ in Vancouver at Seafun, and he used to work with the Northwest Company. Anyway, it came out on Mushroom Records, which was a famous label in Vancouver that had Hart and Doucette and a bunch of different artists on it. And anyway, after I did that, I was still involved with Darryl B., and I had a band called Shakedown. And then what happened is Ray Pettinger and Gary Taylor were involved with Darryl B. Gary Taylor owned Gary Taylor's Show Lounge downtown, which is strippers, and he was sort of a promoter. And Ray Pettinger was actually a good promoter. He had BIM and Foreman Young Band and a few bands, but they always were giving me the runaround, those guys. I would go down to Gary Taylor's and have to wait to get to meet them. And, it was always like, next week, do this, and they were involved with some guy from cocaine dealer, a pilot, and I don't know. Anyway, through all of that, I met Andy DiMartino, who came from Los Angeles, and he came up and he heard my songs because I'd made a tape for Ray Pettinger because I heard he had this label called Casino Records, and some people were recording, so I was kind of getting desperate to get going under my own name, and so I sent him some songs, and then he hooked me up with Andy DiMartino from Los Angeles, and Andy took me up to my band Shakedown. We went up to Edmonton and recorded this song called Good to Have You, which came out as a 45, and it did mediumly well. It was kind of too much of a ballad song, but Andy was a good producer. But Andy said, "Why don't you dump that band, Richard?" And that's when I started playing singles. After that, my first single was up in Squamish. My first single solo job. I was so nervous, but I pulled it off. And after that, I didn't have a band anymore. And I think in the meantime, me and Lisa had moved to Dogwood Street in Coquitlam, and Chelsea was born in 1978, so she was only a little baby when I recorded Holiday in Hollywood. Andy DiMartino was a famous producer already. He produced that song, Rhythm of the Rain, for the Cascades. Listen to the rhythm of the falling rain, telling me what a fool I've been. And then he also, I've just found out, he produced the Wailers, which is out of Seattle, Tacoma. One of my very favorite bands. I just love them. And he produced Captain Beefheart, who was a big San Francisco kind of a guy in the 60s, and another band called Buckwheat. And Andy was really slick, he knew his stuff, even though I don't know about his business dealings. But I'll get into that later. Anyway, he took me to L.A., and I stayed in a hotel the very first time I went there. But the people that I'm just realizing nowadays who he lined me up with, the stupidest thing I ever did was not going to do my second album with him in Nashville, which he offered. And I instead went to Calgary. That was the biggest mistake in my whole career. Anyway, he took me to, I'm just going to go over a bunch of stuff here. He took me to Los Angeles, and I recorded in Devonshire Studios in North Hollywood. And they had artists recording there, the Jacksons, Bing Crosby, Billy Joel, Graham Nash, Boz Scaggs, Marvin Gaye, Kenny Rogers, Whitney Houston, Izzy Osborne, Tom Jones, the Ramones, Donna Fargo, I think Henry Gross. Everybody recorded there anyway. Boz Scaggs and I used the same band on our albums. In fact, when Boz Scaggs came to town here one time, I took Jesse down, and Jesse was a big Duane Allman fan, and Boz remembered me, and he remembered my album too. He liked it a lot. Anyway, I recorded there, and while I was down there, Andy took me to meet this, he's a publisher, and I did one song that I didn't write. I don't know if he got it from Al Gallico or not, but I didn't realize Al Gallico he used to have this booklet I have somewhere saying, I'm giving you 50 million or 100 million hits. He was a top publisher. He was a friend of Chet Atkins, and he was mostly I think he lived in L.A. at the time, but he was involved in the Nashville scene. He Almost Persuaded was one of his big songs. He worked with Billy Sherrill, who I should research him a bit. He was a very famous songwriter. He was involved with Stand By Your Man with Tammy Wynette, Most Beautiful Girl in the World, Charlie Rich, Let Me Be There, Olivia Newton-John. And then he was also involved with the Zombies from England and the Animals, House of the Rising Sun. He was involved in that, and Time of the Season, and Liar by the Zombies. And so Al Gallico was a neat guy. I remember we met him for lunch one day, and he was sort of real Italian, And he was drinking shots of espresso like they were going out of style. But he was a really nice guy. And later in years after I'd finished with Andy and stuff, I made some, even after my second album, I tried to get a hold of him again. I made a whole bunch of tapes at Dogwood. Me and Roger recorded 32 songs there that I wrote, and I put them all on tapes, and I sent them to Al Gallico hoping something would happen, but I never really heard back. I had my hopes pinned on that, because if I would have had Andy still, I would have been a star anyway. So what we had is we went to the studio. I went down to do 3 different sessions, so we did 3 songs each on each session, and we would do, I can't remember if we did the whole song and finished them, but I stayed at a hotel the first time, and then I stayed at Andy's place once with Lisa came with me, and I remember Joyce made a spinach salad. They used to sleep with guns under their pillows. Joyce made a spinach salad once and dumped all the bacon grease on it. Anyway, we stayed there, and we would do three sessions at a time. And so he had hired Jimmy Haskell, this guy who is super famous now. He died just a few years ago. He took me up to Laurel Canyon where Jimmy Haskell lived, and I went in his house. I just took my acoustic guitar, and I sang When We Meet Again. I forget what else. I wrote Holiday in Hollywood while I was down in Hollywood. I had an idea for that song, but that's when I wrote it. But we went to Jimmy Haskell's house, and it was just covered in gold records and platinum records and awards all over the place. He had 250 gold records, 3 Grammy Awards, and an Emmy Award or Emmy Awards. And the thing that impressed me so much about him, he was so nice and talented, and he just treated me so nice. And he said, "Here, come in." He pulled out a cheap little tape recorder and said, "Play me the songs." And so I played him the songs on my acoustic, and he said, "Okay, thanks a lot." And when he came down to the studio, he had all these arrangements written out, but he was responsible for all these songs he arranged. Ode to Billy Joel, Bridge Over Troubled Water by Simon and Garfunkel, Chicago, If You Leave Me Now, Patches, there was a song called Patches. He did a lot of cowboy movies and stuff. He did Shot in the Dark with Peter Sellers, Russia with Love with James Bond. He worked on The Matrix. He worked with Bobby Darin. He did a thing called The Beatles, Sing a Song with the Beatles. He worked with Ricky Nelson, Gloria Gaynor, Barry Manilow, Cher, Chicago. Oh gosh, it's endless how many groups he worked with. But he was so nice, and the thing that impressed me so much about him is how down to earth and genuine he was. He also worked with Diana Ross and Supremes, everybody that was everybody. And when he finished one of my sessions, he came up and gave me a little briefcase, a black briefcase, full of handwritten charts. They were just beautiful writing. When We Meet Again, I think Whirlwind is on it. I still have those. Those are a real treasure nowadays because he's very, very famous. And anyway, the engineer we worked with was Ron Malo. Now, I didn't realize this until just lately, but he worked with Chess Records, which is the most famous blues record company. They, Robbie King from town actually worked with Chess Records. They were from the, I forget, Chicago area or somewhere down there. I'll have to look it up, but they were the first place the Stones recorded over here. The Rolling Stones, they did All Over Now. It's about 64, 65. They're Around and Around, Down the Road a Piece. He worked with all the, Ron Malo, the engineer, he worked with, out at Chess Records, he worked with all the blues and R&B musicians, with Bo Diddley, Etta James, Sonny Boy Williamson, Chuck Berry, Cannonball Adderley, Muddy Waters, Howlin' Wolf, Buddy Guy, John Lee Hooker. He was in the engineer in the Buckingham's Kind of a Drag recording. Kind of a drag. But he did all the engineering on my sessions. So Andy knew all these people. He also worked with Bobby Goldsberg. And while I was recording there were Weather Report, the band was recording there, and they had in that band Jacques Pastoria, and he worked with Joni Mitchell later on. I seen him playing in Vancouver. He was barefoot. He was a fantastic bass player, and he got eventually killed. Got some bouncer punched him out behind some nice nightclub, but he was sort of like a hippie guy. I used to meet him in the hall. They had a beer machine in the hall with the Heineken in it, and he would be out the back with his girlfriend. I think he had a Mercedes or something. I seen him taking a pee against the wall. But he was a neat guy. And the other guys in the band was Wayne Shorter, Joe Zawinul, and Peter Erskine. But Joe used to come over. He was a neat guy. He was from Europe. And I remember going in there. They had a little studio separate in Devonshire. And it was just full of equipment. But Joe and Jacques, they were liking the sessions. No wonder, because all of the great musicians, the musicians on Holiday in Hollywood on the album, we had on drums Ed Green. He worked with Steely Dan, Donna Summer, Hall & Oates, Johnny Mathis, Cher, Glenn Campbell, Rhinestone Cowboy, he worked on that. Diana Ross, Barbra Streisand, the Superman album, Captain and Tennille. He played on the average of 25 hit records a year. And then I had Mike Baird also played drums. He played with Tommy James and the Shondells. He also played with Billy Idol, Hall & Oates, Pointer Sisters, Donna Summers, Richard Marx, Michael Bolton, Rick Springfield, Eddie Money, Kenny Loggins, Juice Newton. So he worked for a lot of people. And another guy was Ralph Humphrey. He worked with Frank Zappa. He was Frank Zappa's drummer, main drummer. He worked with the Manhattan Transfer and Michael Bublé later on. And on the bass guitar, I had Dennis Belfield. He worked with Three Dog Night, Engelbert Humperdinck, the Monkees, Randy Newman, and also had David Hungate, who was fantastic on Caught in a Whirlwind. He worked with Toto. That was his band, who had, what'd they have? Africa, that song Africa, and Roxanne. He also worked on Saturday Night Fever. Then I had Ray Polman, who was in the Wrecking Crew, for God's sakes, the Beach Boys band. They were the best studio guys in L.A., and they worked with Glenn Campbell, and Glenn Campbell actually played with the Beach Boys in Vancouver. When I played a gig with the Beach Boys, Glenn Campbell was with them. Guitar, we had Tom Rotella. He was an in-demand session player. He'd been performing with Noah Jones, Donna Summers, Frank Sinatra, Cher, the Beach Boys, Phil Spector, Lionel Richie, Bette Midler, Pavarotti, David Foster, Gladys Knight, all kinds of people. I don't know about Gladys Knight, but anyway, and then he was played on a lot of my guitar tracks, so Tom Rotella. And then there was Ben Benet. He played with Paul Anka, Dionne Warwick, the Supremes. Keys and synthesizer with Bill Como. He played on cuts with the Jefferson Starship, Little River Band, Ry Cooder, Kenny Rogers, James Taylor, Kiss. Sax, I had this, his name's Pete Christlieb, Christlieb. He played with all kinds of people. He does a great sax solo on Caught in a Whirlwind. He was with Quincy Jones, Tom Waits, Sarah Vaughan, Louis Bellson, Chet Baker, Woody Herman, Count Basie, Tom Waits, Steely Dan, Doc Severinsen. He was in the Tonight Show band. So the guy worked with all kinds of peoples. And then I had the guy playing double reeds and woodwinds, Gene Cipriano. He played with Dean Martin, Nielsen, Sinatra. I got another one there's another name here that spell check ruined. Someone King. But anyway, he played with Sinatra, Dean Martin, all the very big people. And then I had a harpist playing a harp on I think it was on If I Could Write a Song. I don't know who that was. And the background singers on my album were the Waters families. Owen Waters is a famous producer in his own right, but the Waters family are responsible for being on 260 gold records and 100 platinum records. They worked with Johnny Rivers, Neil Diamond, Paul Simon, John Fogerty, Helen Reddy, Patti LaBelle. The guy that came in under Jimmy Haskell's direction that did the strings and everything, his name was Sid Sharp. He was with the L.A. Philharmonic. He actually, I think he studied with Bernstein, Carl Bernstein. He did stuff on the Beach Boys. He probably did stuff on Good Vibrations. Neil Diamond, the Eagles. Anyway, he worked with all these kind of people. So we would do the 3 sessions at a time, and these guys that came in to play, they could cut a session. They would listen to the song. Jimmy Haskell would tell them what the arrangement was, and they'd look at the charts, and they'd cut that thing in like 1 or 2 tries, and it was perfect. And then the Waters family would come in. Man, I'm telling you, they would run over it once, and bang, they would do the vocals so great. It was such a pleasure to work with such people. It was so easy compared to Vancouver. We used to have to go do track after track after track after track, And I forget, we went to a restaurant Andy took me to one time where there was, Sinatra all the big stars used to drink there. It had those kind of red leather booths that had, they got the buttons in them. While we were there, we ran into Johnny Crawford. He knew Andy, and he came over and started talking to us, and I was all thrilled. Oh, Johnny Crawford, he's the guy from The Rifleman, the kid. But he was growing up by then, and so he was drinking like crazy, drinking vodka or something. He was snorting these amyl nitrate things. They're like speed or something. He's a little bit crazy. I looked him up lately, though. He went on to have orchestras and everything. He starred in a lot of movies, that kid. But anyway, he came and tagged along with us out to Andy's house. And I was staying at Andy's place in San Fernando Valley at the time. And Andy had this big ranchero kind of a place with a big pool. And I stayed there during that session. And when we went back, Andy said, "Oh, if you guys want to take the truck, you can go up the mountain here at San Fernando Valley, and there's a bar and restaurant up there. You can drink up there." So I was all thrilled with Johnny Crawford. So we went up there and we were drinking. I'm asking about Rifleman and all this stuff, Chuck Connors, and it was so fun. And but when we left, he starts saying to me, "Yeah, you ever been with a guy?" I go, No, I'm married. I got a little daughter, Chelsea. He said, "Well, it's not so bad, Just close your eyes and pretend I'm your wife." He wanted to give me a blowjob, you know. And so I said, no, I don't want to do that. Gee, I was having such fun talking. So we went back to Andy's house, and I was sleeping on a Haida bed on the couch, and then he tried to get in bed with me, and I said, get away from me, you know. Kind of ruined my whole thing about him, but oh, well, I guess he tried. Andy's daughter was after me, too. He had about a 13-year-old daughter, Andrea, I think her name was. God almighty, she would always want me to, she'd come, you know, tiptoeing through the living room with a little towel around her, you know, naked from her shower. And then I went swimming with her once. She's all over me in the pool. Oh, lift me up, do this to me. I thought, gee, God, I'm married, and also how to jeopardize your career, get involved with a young girl and Andy's daughter, for God's sake. So I stayed right away from her. Anyway, that's that little story. Andy had an office there, and he had a company called Dynamite Productions. And his office, he had an employee, I think it was a guy named Kenny Wynn. Now, I'm not sure about the name, but he was Elvis's personal assistant. He used to travel with Colonel Tom Parker. He was not Elvis's personal assistant. He was Colonel Tom Parker's personal assistant. He told me stories. He would go to Vegas, and when Elvis was doing Vegas, Colonel would gamble like crazy, and he would sit there and keep track of how much the Colonel gambled, and he also, you know, made sure the Colonel got his food proper, and he was like a sort of an accountant type of a guy. But he started working after Elvis died. He started working with Andy, and then he gave me 2 Elvis scarves, which I still have. I'd given one to my sister, but then I got it back off her because I'm afraid it would get lost somewhere. And while I was down there, I met Andy's cousin, who was Johnny Martino, and he was in The Godfather. He played Paulie Gatto in The Godfather. He was also in the Wild Wild West show. He was in Dillinger. He was in Broadway plays. He was on Dick Clark's American Bandstand one time with a song called Babysitting Baby, and he studied under John Cassavetes. But he was a really neat guy. I liked him a lot, and I wrote a song for him called Johnny's Song, If You Try, when I was down there. And then when I recorded my second album, I recorded that song. And I wish Andy would have produced my second album. Damn it, anyway. I'm still mad about that. Should have went to Nashville, Richard. Anyway, his song, If You Try, when he put out a DVD about his life, The Godfather, he used my song, If You Try, on it. It's on the front of that. I have a couple of copies of the DVD. You can buy it online, called Johnny Martino. It has my song singing when it shows pictures of him as he became a star. So anyway, we had another guy, Sid Sharp. I think I mentioned him. He wrote Sid Sharp had, I'm just trying to find his name here. Sid Sharp was responsible. He worked with the Los Angeles Philharmonic Orchestra and everything. But when he brought in the orchestra in to do my sessions, I think it was like a 14-piece string orchestra, but it was fantastic, those sessions. I didn't know how lucky I was. Anyway, while we were down there one time when I think it was near the end of my album, when Lisa was with us, with me, he paid for us to come down. We went, he took us out to Las Vegas, and we went out there, and Andy was gambling half the time. I remember he got 50 grand to sign with Infinity Records, front money. And I went to Vegas, and he was gambling half the night. I don't know if he lost or won, but we went to see Liberace there. I remember Liberace came out on stage in a limo with his gay driver that I found out later was his boyfriend for years. And he got out of this big Rolls-Royce limo on stage with this huge big mink coat and all these diamonds and paraded around. And then a little baby Rolls-Royce drove out after to pick up the coat. That was pretty cute. And then we went and saw Glenn Campbell at the Flamingo. He was great, man. That guy was really good. I didn't know he was in the Wrecking Crew because some of these people working on my album were in that band, the Wrecking Crew, which is like the most famous L.A. musicians of all times. They did a lot of the Beach Boys stuff. And so the drummer, for the Wrecking Crew played on my album. Anyway, we went to, then when I came back, Andy got me to, he flew me to New York to meet him. He came from New York originally, and so we went there to sign with Infinity Records, and we stayed in a little hotel there, but Andy was so thrilled to be in New York. He took me to these delis. We had bagels, hot bagels on the street. He took me to this deli where the sandwiches, the corned beef sandwich, were huge, and you get a great big plate of dill pickles. Then we went to the offices of Infinity to sign, and I remember Andy talking to this guy. Ray Pettinger started trying to sue Andy before signing me over to Dynamite Records from Casino without breaking my contract. I broke my contract with Casino, so Ray Pettinger hated me forever after that. Darryl B. didn't get too pleased either, but those guys were giving me the runaround. I never would have got my album out. But anyway, Andy said to the guys in Infinity, forget it, don't worry about it, it'll be all right, they can sue us in court. He was always said, Andy had the idea, get the hit out first, and then let him sue us later. So anyway, it probably made those guys a bit nervous in Infinity, because later on, after Holiday in Hollywood came out, the album, they had all kinds of promotions. I was on the front page of Billboard magazine. I was also another article in Billboard magazine. I was on the front of RPM magazine. I was on the front of Record World, had a write-up about Holiday in Hollywood being a great pop album. And I heard Sam the Record Man in L.A. had life-size pictures of me holding the album in the record store. And I wish I could have got a hold of one of those, but Andy showed me around New York, which was really neat. But anyway, Caught in a Whirlwind became a hit in the last few years. After 2000, people started getting onto that song because it's got such good musicians and playing on it. So one guy called it, there's two masterpieces on that album. So that's pretty nice to know for my history. While I was involved in that album, before my second album, I met Bill Crompton, who I ended up sharing an apartment with years later. And he was a songwriter from England. He released Holiday in Hollywood over in England, him and John Schroeder. John Schroeder was a composer-singer who was involved over there. He had a song called Walking Back to Happiness at one time. And he was involved with Crompton. Crompton and Morgan Jones were partners as writers. And Bill Crompton, they released Holiday in Hollywood on Harbor Records in England. It was also came out in France and who knows where. But Bill Crompton wrote Papa Catapedal Beetle, which was a kind of a big hit. And he also wrote Why for the Beatles with Tony Sheridan, and that was a hit too. He wrote Let's Make a Memory for Cliff Richards. He wrote House of Bamboo for Andy Williams, which is a number 3 song. He was involved with the Everly Brothers. He wrote Heart of a Teenage Girl. He wrote another song called John, Paul, George, and Ringo, which was a hit. And he was involved somehow with Black is Black, that song, because I ended up doing a recording of that. Anyway, that's about all I can think of here. That after that, Holiday in Hollywood, Infinity Records, unfortunately, got in financial trouble and went under. I had signed a record deal for 5 albums to come out. I would have been a star, Andy would have taken my career over. But the company went under and MCA Records was part of, Infinity was part of MCA Records. The only guy they picked up off the roster was Rupert Holmes, who had the Pina Colada song, and Spyro Gyra, I think, but they didn't pick my contract up. And it, probably because of the lawsuits, now that I'm thinking of it, going against my contract. It's too much hassle for them. They don't want to get involved. And so that killed my whole album, and it still became a hit in Canada. I was nominated for the Juno Awards, and as Best Male Vocalist, I won a PRO award, which is SOCAN nowadays, for one of the top 10 songs in Canada, which was also Burton Cummings' Break It To Me Gently, Bruce Cockburn, Where the Lions Sleep, Frank Mills, The Music Box Dancer. So I got a plaque for that for my holiday in Hollywood. I was nominated on the RPM Awards also, so I got that far anyway. But and then instead of going with Andy offered to take me to Nashville to record a second album, but I was kind of a little bit worried about him. I heard that, some guys were still looking for their money to get paid, and he was living in Nashville at the time, and I was just afraid of getting involved in lawsuits and everything. So unfortunately, I went and signed with these people, McKinnon's. Derek McKinnon had got involved with Bill Crompton and was putting money into the situation to pay for my recordings, and he'd put in $100,000 or something. I don't know what the deal. I didn't know what was going on there. And so I ended up going with the McKinnons because they lived in Calgary, and I kind of trusted them financially more. But that was a super mistake. So anyway, that's the end of this little session. So thank you. Well, good morning. Sound like West. This is a little tag on to my first album. Speaking of West, he was so happy when I went down to record. I remember him playing the Whirlwind and cuts. He loved that song I wrote called Free Wind, too. I've recorded several versions of that, and I wish it would have been a hit. But anyway, I had a lot of songs I wrote that should have been hits, I think. Maybe someday my kids or somebody will get them out there better. But anyway, this is a little tag on about the Waters family that sang the backups on my second album. I was so lucky to have such great musicians and singers, and they could do it so quick. The Waters family were two girls, Maxine and Julia, and Luthier was their brother. Warren Waters was the father. Now, I don't... It was Luthier that was with them, I think, not Orrin. But anyway, not positive. I should look on my credits. Anyway, when they came into the studio, they just did. They ran over each song, maybe once and talked about it a little bit, maybe twice at the very, very most, and then they cut the songs. They were so good, and they were so friendly. They put their arms around me. Oh, we love your music. We love your songs. And they were so nice, And they backed up so many famous people. It's Michael Jackson, Adele, Whitney Houston, Barbra Streisand, Paul McCartney, Rod Stewart, Lionel Richie, Ringo, George Harrison, Guns N' Roses, Julio Iglesias, Rick James, Bobby Womack. And they also used to tour with Neil Diamond. They backed up Eddie Money, Leonard Cohen, Carole King, John Fogerty, Aretha Franklin, Michael Jackson, Natalie Cole, Paul Simon, B.B. King, and just the list goes on and on and on and on. Probably even, I don't know if they ever did Frank Sinatra or not, but they backed up everybody in Hollywood. They were like the Pointer Sisters, which were another group down there. Same kind of idea, the father and the three kids. That's exactly what the Waters family also won the Ella Voice Award for vocalists, which is from the Ella Fitzgerald Vocal Awards. So they won that also. So anyway, they were so great the way they would come in, and everybody down there was so laid back and friendly, and they did the most amazing vocals on the back of my songs. I'd never experienced people like these ones in Hollywood that could actually cut records quick. Everything we did up here was, it is mind-boggling how slow it went. And half the people up in Vancouver were just learning how to run the machines and record, so they made a lot of mistakes that the band would have to redo, and then by that time you lose the feel. You know, I've always been a person, if you listen to my recordings, I write a song and I cut it the first time, every time, just about. And, you know, I always find it's the best the first. So anyway, that's my little story about the Waters family. A little tag on here, I just looked up the credits on my album. It was actually Orrin Waters. He was a producer and he was the vocalist. That I don't know, they all toured with Neil Diamond, Eddie Money, and all these other people, and Lionel Richie, Paul McCartney. They did a lot of session work. But Orrin is he was the most famous of the Waters family. Maxine's very famous too. But I guess Luthier wasn't there. It was Orrin, Julia, and Maxine that backed me up on my album. So that's just a little footnote, okay? Okay, this is about my second LP. My first long-playing album was Holiday in Hollywood. It came out on long-playing record, I forgot to mention, cassette and 8-track, which I have copies of every one of them stored away. My second album was self-titled, called Richard Stepp. It came out on Vera Cruz label out of Edmonton. I was recorded at Sundown Studios in Edmonton and Smooth Rock Studios in Calgary. It has the title as producer as Wes Dacus. Wes Dacus owned Sundown Studios in Edmonton. He was famous for, he had a band many years ago called Wes Dacus and the Rebels. They were one of the early bands in the late 50s, early 60s. And on keyboard in the studio, we hired this band, some of the people from this band called One Horse Blue, which released, I don't know, they probably had 2 or 3 or 4 albums out themselves, all on the Vera Cruz label. And they were all recorded at Sundown. They were sort of like the house musicians, but nowhere near what they had in Hollywood. As I said, this going to Edmonton was my biggest mistake ever. Getting involved with the McKinnons in Calgary pretty well ruined my marriage and ruined everything else. I should have went to Nashville when Andy offered me. I kicked myself every day for that. Anyway, quit whining, Richard. So anyway, what we had is on the keyboards and piano was Mavis McCauley, who was a really good vocalist and an artist in her own right. She had an album or 2 out herself. She was in a band called Foster Child out of Edmonton, which I think Peter Sweetser, that later on played keyboards with me sometimes in the Richard Stepp band. He was so good, that guy. He could just jump in anywhere and didn't have to tell him the key or anything. Peter Sweetser's still playing, and he is fantastic. But anyway, Mavis McCauley played on my album. And she also did some of the background vocals, and I also played the piano on the album. I only started playing on my own albums and recordings, except for the Northwest Company, of course, where I played drums. I played guitar a little bit on my second album. I don't know which songs for sure. And I played the piano on Too Hot to Handle. That was the first time anybody ever heard my boogie woogie piano. And on sax on that Too Hot to Handle, we had a guy named P.J. Perry, who is very famous in Canada. He's won Juno Awards and all kinds of jazz awards, and he's had many, many bands and all jazz bands. But he's still playing, too. He's fantastic, that guy. And then we had Barry Allen worked on the album. He's a famous guy, too, out of Edmonton. He actually was in an original band called the Painter Band. They were called Painter. And he helped produce and mix. And he was an award winner. He put out 4 or 5 albums himself. He was sort of like a star around Edmonton because Marcia, my wife's brother, John, that lives up there, phoned me up one day and said, "Oh, Barry Allen's coming to town to do a show." So I guess he was kind of big up there. And then another guy that worked on the album, he was engineering and producing too, was Jerry Dare. He was in a band called China White. He was a guitarist around Edmonton. I suppose he played some of the guitar on the thing on the album, and then we had a guy named Rocco. He I forget his real name. He played the he played the drums on the cuts, and he was in a band called One Horse Blue also. And another guy was Gay DeLorme, who is a really famous guitarist around, actually in the world. He wrote the rodeo song, "Well, it's 40 below and I don't give a fuck, got a heater in my truck and I'm off to the rodeo. Alaman left, Alaman right, get off the stage, get your right foot right, get off the stage, you goddamn goof, you know, you piss me off, you fucking jerk, get on my nerves." Well, here comes Johnny with his pecker in his hand. He's a one-ball man, and he's off to the rodeo. Anyway, he wrote that song. And he used to sing Asshole from El Paso. But Gay DeLorme, he did an album with the Edmonton Symphony Orchestra. He was a fantastic guitarist. He could play like flamenco guitar and electric guitar. He was sort of like from the Chet Atkins style. And I can't say enough good things about Gay. His sense of humor was great. And he was so funny in the studio. Him and Howard Steele were doing a lot of cocaine when we were recording. We went into the studio in Edmonton and cut a whole bunch of tracks. Now up there, we had Jim Gaines. He was the first guy they hired us to produce the album. And Jim Gaines come up and stayed in a hotel there, and Derek McKinnon hired him to come up. I don't know how much he paid him, quite a bit. Maybe, I don't know how much he paid him, $10,000 up front. I know that for sure, all expenses. Anyway, Jim Gaines come up. He was a really nice guy, sort of like I don't know, he reminded me of a guy from Louisiana or something, but at the time, he was actually from California. He lived in Grants Pass, and he worked with Santana. He engineered all the Santana stuff in the early days, and he also did that big famous album that came out in around 2000 something with like a rebirth of Carlos Santana. That was a Grammy Award winning album, and Jim Gaines has won all kinds of Grammys. He also produced Stevie Ray Vaughan, the album that The House Is Rockin'. That album he produced, and he also produced a lot of Steve Miller stuff. He's mostly an engineer rather than a producer. Andy was a producer, Andy DiMartino. Andy had a little bit more sense on what was hit records, and Jim Gaines was like a master of the board, and you know, he worked with Huey Lewis and the News, the Doobie Brothers, John Lee Hooker, George Thorogood. So Jim Gaines was sort of in the blues field. So when my album was finished, it was sort of a bare bones album, and it was sort of produced more like Jim Gaines would do stuff. Too bad I just didn't stick to blues stuff on that, because he would have been the perfect guy. But anyway, when it all was over and done, Derek and the people that were involved back in the album listened to it, and they weren't happy with it, because compared to Holiday in Hollywood, it was just like, there was no comparison. And I remember I'll tell this later, when Bill Crompton heard that album, actually when the whole album was finished and came out, he said, "That's not as good as your first album, Richard." And I got pissed off at him. I was playing at a gig and walked away from him, didn't talk to him for a few years, but he was right anyway. I couldn't take it, And so the next guy we got after Jim Gaines, we went down to Smooth Rock Studios in Calgary and started to redo it again. So we flew up this guy named Howard Steele from LA also. He was a very famous producer, and he'd produced songs by the Pointer Sisters. He did California Dreamin' with the Mamas and Papas, Dusty Springfield. He worked with Carl Perkins, Frank Sinatra, Etta James, Lionel Richie. So he was really up there too. And he was a nice guy too. He was doing coke at the time, so a lot of people were in those days. And when we were at Smooth Rock, him and Gay were going in the back room all the time, snorting up working on my record, and I also had Gary Peterson from the Guess Who. They got him in to play the drums on. I think it was might have been Too Hot to Handle. I'm not sure about that. I think he played drums on that song, Too Hot to Handle. I'll look at the credits and get back to you about that. But he played on my album too, the guy from the Guess Who. He's a great drummer. And while I was out in Calgary, I did... anyway, what happened is the album got finally finished, and we shopped it around to different record companies, but nobody bid on it. You know, it's... A lot of people like that second album now, but it just doesn't have the magic the first one has. So anyway, and I should have had somebody, you know, steering my career then, like Andy DiMartino could have done, because he knew what songs to pick and everything. I had too much say in this thing, you know, and by that time I thought I was on top of the world about everything. So, you know, I made some bad decisions there, real bad. Anyway, while I was out there, the McKinnons, I would stay at their house. Lynn McKinnon, Derek's wife, sort of took over my management. And then she lined me up TV shows. I did radio interviews in Calgary, Edmonton. I did ones for Vernon, Kelowna. I did some in Vancouver. Vancouver never accepted me as a star like they did out in Calgary. And actually, I'm bigger in the States. My record was... People know me all over the world, all over Europe and Japan and Korea, more than they do in Vancouver. My friend West used to call me the most famous guy in the music business. Anyway, I played around in Calgary a lot, and the album finally came out, and it came out in Veracruz, but, you know, they were such a small company. They didn't know how to promote. You know, when I think back of it, it really makes me sad that it never got the promotion. And, you know, my first album got big promotion, front of Billboard magazine, you know, Record World, all these things, and they made deals all over the world. I even have a 45 from France that came out, you know, and who knows where else. You know, it came out in Sweden. I don't have any of the records that came out there, but, you know, the second album just was such a rinky-dink production. And I think Derek spent about $80,000 to record it. And I know they never, or maybe 100, they never spent anywhere near that on my first album. But anyway, I did, while I was out in Calgary, I used to go out there for weeks and record, and, you know, it made me it sort of broke me up with my family, because I'm staying at these McKinnon's house all the time, and they're whining and dining me, and, you know, I'm smoking cigarettes, and Derek even gave me a nice Gretsch guitar once I think a 12-string, and the Gretsch guitar disappeared somewhere up in Edmonton. One of the guys in my band, I think, snipped it. I wish I still had it, but I used to stay at their house. So, you know, my wife's back home with Chelsea, and, you know, Chelsea had been born by then, and I don't know, it was terrible. Anyway, I did the CFCN. I did the home cooking show on CFCN, where I had some of the guys from my recordings out there, and I had a guy named Rolly Sanderson. I think he played with me there for a while. And I did the home cooking show. I did 2 or 3 songs on there, and with a band. And then I remember the guy that interviewed me on that home cooking show was kind of a goofy guy. He says, "Yeah, I hear you're from the West Coast, eh?" And I said, "Yeah." He said, I heard they smoke a lot of salmon out there." In other words, he's joking about pot. And then I did the Miss Calgary pageant. That was something else. I had a tuxedo, and there was, 5, 6, 7 girls in it. the mayor was there, and I got up and sang Holiday in Hollywood, and I don't know if I sang one other song. I wish I had a film of that, but somebody sent me some pictures, so I have pictures of it. I do have the home cooking show, which is on YouTube. Richard Stepp home cooking show. The Miss Calgary pageant would have been wonderful to have. It was televised, I know for sure. But that was on CFCN in Calgary. So I did radio interviews, a lot of stuff like that, and promotion. I even did a thing for the Boutique of Leathers out there where I was in the paper. They let me try on jackets and took a picture of me with some girl for, to put in the paper to advertise their company. And I went and he gave me a real nice long leather jacket for doing that. Also, I formed a band after a while out there called the Richard Stepp Band. And I think that's the band. Peter Sweetser played with us a little bit sometimes. He was the keyboard player. He lives in Vancouver now. But he was from Foster Child too, I think, and he played a lot of different groups. But we did gigs at the Calgary Stampede. I did clubs in Calgary. I forget the name of the club. Different clubs in Calgary. And then I did Edmonton. I can't remember if this is with the Richard Stepp Band. I think it was, but I have a recording of some club up in Calgary we played at. It was called the Boardwalk or something, I think. We did a week there with Long John Baldry, who had the song out, Don't You Lay No the Boogie Woogie on the King of Rock and Roll. Man, he's great, that guy. If you ever get a chance to look him up on YouTube. His voice was something else. He came from England, and he was produced by Rod Stewart, and his first album, the one with Boogie Woogie, was Rod Stewart and Elton John produced that album. It was a huge hit back in the 60s, early 70s, and he ended up living in Vancouver. I found out he was gay. I didn't know that at the time, but he's a big, tall, thin guy with a heavy-duty voice and a good guitar player and harmonica player. Anyway, the Richard Stepp Band had Nick Doctor. He was a session player. He was from South Africa, from Durban, and he'd lived in London for a while and worked at Pi Studios as a session drummer. He worked with Van Morrison, Ronnie Wood, Oliver, and he played with a band around here called Oliver and the Elements. Then I had Michael Casper on bass. He was from a band called Hit and Run. And, of course, I mentioned Rolly Sanderson played with us. He did a lot of studio work and TV shows and stuff. Then I had keyboard, other than Pete Sweetser, I had a guy named Mike Hanford. He played a B3 Hammond. We had to pack that thing around. And he played with the Shondells out of Winnipeg originally. They had a record out called Another Man and Take It Back. And he was in a band called the Gettysburg Address. That's what the Shondells ended up as, the Gettysburg Address. And they had records out, Love is a Beautiful Thing, My Girl, and Come Back Baby. But he was kind of a sort of an ornery guy a little bit. Heavy-duty guy, though. He could play, man, he was great. And sing good. He could play guitar. And I played guitar and piano in the band. I used to play quite a bit of guitar back in those days. And that's when I had my nice white Les Paul. I remember we were playing the Trade Winds no, it wasn't the Trade Winds. I used to play there in Calgary. I've got live recordings of that. We were playing at a place up in Edmonton, and I leaned my guitar up against my amp, and it fell over and broke the neck. And then I got it fixed. And then I took it in Vancouver to Ichi and got it really fixed good and gave it to Jesse, which I hope he looks after the thing. I kind of wish I had it back myself. I liked that guitar, but anyway, Jesse loves it too, and he's proud of it, and I'm glad. So anyway, we went around as that band for a while, and we did gigs all over the place. And I did that, the guy that owned a boutique of leathers where I did the modeling thing, his name was Barry Lamley. He also started school out here. I think it was called the Columbia School of Broadcasting, and he offered to record me there once. Later years, as a sort of a student, not a student. The students would practice on me. I thought, I'm not doing that, not after what I've been through. But living at McKinnon's was, I don't know. She had 3 boys, Mitch, Brady, and Tyler. Mitch was kind of the oldest one, and then Tyler. And Brady was a little off kilter. I don't know what was wrong with him, but Mitch was sort of like I think he was kind of like a dope smoker kind of a guy. But I remember when I used to stay there, they used to have Grey Cup, and the Grey Cup parties. They'd get up and start drinking champagne with orange juice for breakfast. I did a lot of drinking in those days, which, they drank a lot, those people. And Lynn chain smoked. I ended up smoking. I smoked on and off all my life, but Lynn smoked constantly, and she, I think she's died now of lung disease. But they would have all day long, like on party days, it'd be champagne for breakfast, and then, in the early afternoon, it'd be like drinking scotch. We used to drink scotch and Drambuie, Rusty Nails, and then it would be after dinner, Spanish coffees or Monte Cristos, which were coffee with brandy and Grand Marnier. It was like, holy crap, they drank a lot. And Derek was a real nice guy. He was a salesman out there, and he was really good at that. He made a lot of money, that guy, and he was always wheeling and dealing and buying stuff. That's where those guitars he got somehow. He ended up starting to have an affair with a girl named Susie. I was even with him one night when up in Edmonton when we were doing something. We went over to her place, and he ended up staying overnight with her. And then eventually him and Lynn broke up. And anyway, I did a couple of road trips with Lynn where we did promotion, for overnight things, but I made sure we had separate rooms. But anyway, I played a lot of clubs around there. But one thing they did have nice was a Cadillac Baritz, which I used to get to drive around a lot. And, I remember when we were in Edmonton playing, that's where I hurt my wrist. Nick Doctor and I were drinking one night up there. We're drinking brandy or something, a whole bunch of us, I guess, and we decided we were going to arm twist, and we started arm twisting, and he went and jumped the gun on me, and I heard something snap in my right wrist, and I went, oh, shoot. We were playing a club there at the time, too. And I think I went to the hospital, and they said, it's probably a broken tendon up your wrist. And so I had to wear a thing around my wrist for a while. And, after that, my piano playing was never quite the same. I couldn't hit. I used to use my little finger to hit fast note, So then I had to start using my finger next to my little finger. I use my little finger nowadays, but that wrist still hurts if I don't watch out. If I do something too much with it, it starts to hurt. So it kind of screwed me up for the rest of my life, that did. And anyway, I remember Chelsea came out with Lisa once to stay at McKenna's when I was out there. And they had a living room that they never used with all the fancy crap in it. And Chelsea broke an ornament out there. But, I don't think Lisa and Chelsea ever felt welcome out there because the McKinnons took over my whole life, and it was like I was their little playboy and little plaything, and, the little recording star, and, and so, I don't know, that kind of started the road to breaking up our marriage. And finally, I got... After, my second album couldn't seem to go anywhere, and I kept, going out there flogging away on these road trips and staying at that house for, be a month at a time and being away from my family. I finally just said that's enough, and I went home. And I thought, well, I'm going to start recording at home. because the album never went anywhere, and I was sick of the whole thing by then. I started getting depressed then about that whole thing. I had enough of that. Anyway, it's too bad that second album, there I'm kicking myself again for not going to Nashville. That would have changed my whole life, but maybe it would have changed it for the worst. Who knows, so you just do what you do as you go through life, and everybody goes through things like that. So my next chapter coming up is going to be when I returned home from Calgary, and I think, I don't know where I was. I was living at Dogwood Street by then, by the time I was doing all the Calgary stuff. And so I'm going to start on the next chapter, the hired guns days and Dogwood, when the kids were little. Okay, famous people I've met. Okay, Beach Boys, Rolling Stones, The Who, Johnny Crawford from the Rifleman, Evan Kemp, who was a country star around Vancouver. I'm just going down the list. Bob Hope at the Palisades a few times. Chuck Berry, I played a gig with him at War Memorial. 10 years after, The Byrds, Paul Revere and the Raiders, Johnny Winter, Steve Stills, Johnny Martino, Andy D. Martino, Weather Report, the jazz band, Sonny Terry, Brownie McGee, Frankie Jean Lewis, Linda Gale Lewis, The Guess Who, Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck, Boz Scaggs, David Soul from Starsky and Hutch, Hoyt Axton, country singer, Ian Tyson, I met him, Gordon Lightfoot, met him, Trooper, Prism, Seeds of Time, that's a band from Vancouver, Danny Tripper, Danny McGuinness from Fireweed. I've met a lot of the local guys, of course. Brave Belt, which was Randy Bachman's band, and also Bachman Turner Overdrive, did a gig with them. Powder Blues, Brian Adams, Bruce Allen, Craig McDowell from promoters in town here, Bruce Allen, who managed Brian Adams, Craig McDowell, who worked with Brian Adams later on too, Crowbar, Durris Maxwell, the drummer from town, Howard Steele, a producer from L.A., Jim Gaines, a producer from from L.A., who worked with Stevie Ray Vaughan, Santana, and all those people. Country Joe, from Country Joe and the Fish, Doucette, who was a local guy but made it sort of big, Kenny Lovelace, who's Jerry Lee's guitar player. And these are different biker gangs. I'm just including them right now. Big Mike the Snoz, he was the president of the Hells Angels in the East End. 101 Nights, the Rebels, the Tribesmen from, the Rebels are from Edmonton and Saskatoon. 101 Nights were from Powell River. Tribesmen from Squamish. Rebels had a guy named Tiny. He was a big guy. He used to look out for us, and we were in Edmonton at the Kingsway Hotel. Buddy Knox, Wally Hyde, the silver mine owner, Val Koppel, the crane owner, of course my friend West, the entire West Coast, Sid Sharp, the guy from the Los Angeles Philharmonic, Al Gallico, the guy that brought you 250, he had 250 gold records or something. Jimmy Haskell had 150 gold records. He was my arranger. Al Gallico was involved in publishing. Ron Malo, the engineer at Devonshire. Wes Dacus, up in Edmonton from Wes Dacus and the Rebels. Barry Allen. Les Vogt, who was a promoter in Vancouver and also a star from The Blamers. He put out that song. Don Hunter was a guy I met up in Watson Lake. He was, I think he was in the legislature up there or something. He was quite the character. Daryl B., all these DJs I met. Daryl B., Roy Hennessy, Fred Latrimo, Rick Honey. Met Paul Horn, Warren Beatty, Julie Christie, Long John Baldry, Johnny Crawford from the Rifleman, I think I mentioned him. Johnny Martino, okay, Frankie. The Byrds, I met them. Who else now? Crowbar, that's another band I met. They were a big band in Vancouver, or in Canada. Paul Horn, Beach Boys, yep, Beach Boys. Okay, that's good. Acts that I've gone and seen, just as a few of them that are big acts, were Moody Blues. I've seen them. I've seen ZZ Top. I've seen Joni Mitchell, The Cream, Joan Baez, John Hammond, Jose Feliciano, Liberace, Glenn Campbell, Fats Domino, Jerry Lee Lewis a bunch of times, Buddy Rich, Wayne Newton, Canned Heat, Little Richard, Buddy Knox. Seen all those ones. Okay, that's it for now. This is the next chapter. The Dogwood days and Richard and the Hired Guns. I'd got fed up with Calgary and Edmonton, even though when I was living at Dogwood, I still went out there. I was still trying to promote my album, and but it wasn't doing that good. So me and Lisa had moved from Marine Drive, I think, the house with their parents, up in this Dogwood house in Coquitlam, which was real nice up there. And it was a nice little house, only one bedroom, but we had, I guess the kids used to sleep in the living room or something. Well, when I first there went, we only had Chelsea, and she'd been born in St. Paul's. I went to her, remember when she got born, I whistled at her when she came out. And then Jessie was born later. Anyway, the house had a backyard, a big backyard. We had two dogs, Kayla, which is sort of a husky, and Carmen, which was a Cocker Spaniel. There was an old fish pond back there that was empty. We didn't want to put water in it because Chelsea was only little. And then we had, there was an old tool shed back there. The whole yard was fenced. And me and Lisa had a garden in the back. And then there was a tool shed back there that I started to fix up. I put the tiles on the roof. Little did I know you're supposed to start on the bottom and work up. I started on the top, and then, oh, this doesn't work. So then I went down, had to redo it, started on the bottom, put the shingles on the roof. And then I got a whole bunch of insulation and went inside and insulated the walls, and then I put up like particle board and made a little studio in there. It was very small, but I could get my I think I had my CP80 then. Yeah, I did. The CP80 Yamaha piano, full scale piano, and my double set of drums, because I remember Jessie used to come in there and play the drums sometimes. And then we had my 4-track TIAC recorder. It was a cassette recorder, and my reel-to-reel in there. And Roger Stomperud, who is probably the most responsible guy in my whole life for preserving my music, and he wrote my whole website and everything. Can't say enough good things about him. I even did a duo with him once and went on a cruise ship for a week. And he quit his job and everything, was going to go with me, and I kind of, I don't know, the agent screwed us around, and then he wanted us to have a trio, and so I kind of got fed up and quit, and then poor Roger had to go get us another job, and we didn't talk for years after. And now Roger finally looked me up again. Meanwhile, he'd gone over to Norway and lived and got married, and he'd suffered depression too. But anyway, getting back to the little recording studio, I recorded 32 songs in that studio with Roger engineering. West said he was going to produce, but he used to come out and get so drunk, he'd mostly sit there and half asleep and throw in the odd suggestion, I guess. But we did all these original songs of mine with the hopes that I could send them down to Al Gallico in Los Angeles from my first album and get another album or something and get going again. I never gave up, you see, and a lot of good songs on there too. And so anyway, I did all the instruments except the bass. I played all the drums, the guitar, piano, and Roger played bass. And then Lisa and I did all the background singing. Lisa's really a good singer. And we did all the background singing. Roger might have sang a little bit. And I remember the kids used to come in there when I was practicing drums. The Nicole from next door and Nathan, they used to hang around a lot. We used to go hiking through the parks. I'd take all the kids with me, but they used to come over and mess around. And I remember Jesse singing, he had no teeth in the front. He sang, "You drive me crazy." That was a song I wrote, "You Drive Me Crazy." But he was such a funny little kid. I always thought something was wrong with him. He was so haywire, but he turned out to be what a wonderful man he turned out to be. Talented too. Chelsea's talented too and beautiful. Never takes a bad picture. Anyway, I did all these recordings in there. I was still going to Alberta sometimes, but I was pretty well screwed up. I was going to Alberta, I guess a lot even then, because Chelsea was very little. And because I remember talking to Andy on the phone about stuff, about recording, and he flew Lisa and I to LA once when Chelsea was little and she stayed with somebody. So I was going to Alberta still a lot at that time, when the Dogwood days, and that's what I hated. It messed me up with my family and everything. And it was like it was hard to have a family and be a rock star. Those two things don't go together. That's why so many people in the music business break up with their families, is because you get caught up in the whirlwind, as I should say, and then, you're torn between the two. And that's what eventually broke Lisa and I up when we moved she moved, I was away in the Queen Charlotte's playing, and she got a chance. Her parents got this house out in Maple Ridge with a big back part, and she wanted to move out there, and I don't know why I ever agreed to that, but she was getting fed up with me by that time. She didn't work for the first few years that I was out recording and everything. Well, the kids were being born, and then she got a job, and then it was once she moved out. She moved away when I was up in the Queen Charlotte's, and my poster went missing. I had a Norman Rockwell poster that was real nice from an old house, and she moved all my stuff out there. And when I came back, I moved out there with them into that big house, but I never felt welcome there. It was, once she got in that house, that was the end of our marriage. And then I started to rebel out there, and I was out. I had to drive all the way downtown from Maple Ridge every night to play. I was down at the Century Plaza and places like that playing, and I would get home 3 a.m. I was starting to snort cocaine a little bit then, because everybody was doing it back then. And then I'd keep you awake for hours, and then I'd be up in the morning, getting stuff for the kids and cleaning the damn house, which was always a horrible mess. And I'd always have treats for the kids coming home from school. So that was a hard life. Anyway, getting back to the Dogwood days, we recorded all those 32 songs. And then I sent them all over the place trying to get a deal, but nothing ever happened. But the recordings are all on YouTube, the Dogwood days, or Dogwood sessions. I started playing singles after I came back from Edmonton. Some of the timeline here is a little mixed up, but when I started, my first single I think I ever played was in Squamish, and I was there very nervous. And then I started playing singles all over Vancouver. The Woods Hotel, John B. was a neighborhood pub up the road. It used to be packed. I was playing up there when Holiday and Hollywood came out, because I remember all the crowds coming in there and people. I was there when the Whitecaps won the cup, and they all were in there celebrating. It was like an English pub, but it was a real hangout, full every night. But I started playing singles all over town, and then it got to be piano bars after, and my guitar playing got less and less and less, and my piano got more and more and more. And then I ended up playing piano bars, every piano bar in town. I was booked solid. All of that's why I made good money. But, when you got kids and I'm out every night, it just doesn't work. And, I was playing the Century Plaza downtown, and I don't know, I played all over the place. I did some shows. I did a Rogers cable show for the Tea House in Stanley Park. They did an interview with me there once. I did also a Rogers. By this time, I did the other one, the Rogers cable show. I was living in the West End by then. We'd broken up. I did a show there that's on YouTube too. I think I'd been up for 2 days or something like that, smoking cocaine, for Christ's sake. On this dumbass drug that is. And I went and did that show. Boy, oh boy. Anyway, I played the Sands Hotel a lot. There was Basil Pantages and his gang used to come there. This is after the Dogwood days, so... but back in the Dogwood days, I'm sort of rambling here, but the Dogwood days were wonderful times. And I did a lot of recording out there. And it's too bad that Lisa and I ever broke up. But what happened is once she got out to that house in Maple Ridge, and I was sort of rebelling, I didn't feel welcome. She wanted me to get a job and quit the music business. And I'd had 2 albums out, and I was still trying, and there's no way I was going to quit and go be a car salesman or work at McDonald's when I'm, 35 years old. God almighty, I'm a good musician, I'm a good songwriter, and there's no way I was going to quit. So to put an ultimatum at me like that, I never forgave her, and I never will. But she put up with a lot from me, I must admit, and she was a good wife, and so I can't say, I still love her in my heart. So I just don't agree with her on anything. Politics, religion, nothing. That's what party broke us up too. So anyway, after we broke up, one time we went on when I was playing singles, I remember we took the kids up to Kelowna once. For 5 weeks I went up and played this place called the Ouija's up there, where it was a neighborhood pub. And I played up there for 5 weeks, and we took the van, and we had a tent that was like a kitchen tent, screens, and we had that up there. And I would go to work at night. It was so nice up there, nice hot weather. Where they were right on the beach at a campground, right across from the pub where I was playing. And I'd go over there. I'd come home at night. They'd be in bed, and I'd sit in my van and listen to music and smoke a joint or something like that. And the kids would play all day at the beach. And Jesse told me some guy was kind of after him there, some gay guy, later on in years. But when me and Lisa finally split up from Maple Ridge, it was just too much. I used to go down and bang away on my drums there because I was pissed off. And, Gordon and Gwen weren't exactly easy to live with. They never liked me anyway. My mom and I went out there once for Christmas, and my mom said, "Let's get out of here." I said, "Yeah." And they were so thick-headed sometimes, mostly him, even though he was very nice and smart and all that things. But everybody has their faults, and so, they were also nice to me sometimes in a lot of ways too. So, but Gordon used to have a drink at night, and then he'd start to fall asleep on the couch. His head would go back and back and back, and then whoop, he'd bring it forward. Anyway, when we finally did break up, I moved down to the West End and to the Beach Towers, and I was on the 20th floor, and West moved into one of the other towers across the street. And then I started playing all the piano bars downtown, the Plaza Hotel. I did the TV show for Rogers Cable. I did the Tea House interview. I met this guy named Rob. I forget his last name. He started me into smoking coke, and that was a bad part of my life. But everybody went through it, so you got to understand that. All the guys in the music business, I was lucky to survive that. And Danny Tripper lived down there, him and Georgie, his girlfriend, and this other, she was, I think, a native girl. I can't remember her name. I used to go over there and party with Tripper and them at nights too. And I also met this, she was a hooker, I think, or an escort girl, Donna, through that Rob guy. I never slept with her or nothing, but she used to come over and use me for coke, you know, like she'd give me one toke and then it would be like, then I would buy, you know, so that's a stupid part of my life. I shouldn't be putting this in, but it is part of my life, so if you don't like it, don't listen. And that Rob guy, he eventually got busted for cocaine. He even got someone to break and steal all his furniture once so he could get insurance money to buy more cocaine, and he started ripping people off. That's the whole nature of that drug. And but Danny Tripper, he lived over there. We used to have good parties. And when I played the Sands Hotel, the owner, Mr. P, I used to bring back, when I was going to the Charlottes at the time, I used to bring back abalone and crab for him in big coolers. The Charlottes is another whole experience. I'm going to put that in my sex tape. But I'm going to do a whole program on the Charlottes. Anyway, when I played the Sands, I used to play there, and I used to play the Pacific Palisades. Now, Pacific Palisades, I used to sit at the bar and drink with David Soul from Starsky and Hutch. And I also met Bob Hope 2 or 3 times there. He used to stay there. And Frank Opsel, who was a kind of a wheeler-dealer stock market guy, his dad owned Opsel Steel originally. Frank was a rich guy. He used to come down in a big limo, and he'd be drinking, and he used to bring a little snare drum down and play the brushes with me when I played the piano. But he had lots of money. Some days he'd lose $80,000, and other days he'd make $80,000 on the stock market. He had his own little ticker tape thing in his apartment, and he lived in a big sort of a penthouse thing with a big balcony down on False Creek. I went over there a few times. He had a big grand piano and all kinds of pictures of Sinatra. He used to go down to Vegas all the time, see Sinatra. I remember when Sinatra and them died, years later, Frank said, "Oh, I go to Vegas now, you could shoot a cannon through it." No, he said, "The clubs here are terrible, and you can shoot a cannon through them, never hit anybody." But he used to come down to he knew Bob Hope from some thing a long time ago, so I used to, we used to meet Bob Hope in the lobby, and I even took a picture of Frank with Bob Hope that he had on his mantle years later, and I don't know why I was so stupid not to get into the picture. That would have been a great picture to have. Another guy that used to come down was Basil Pantages. He was from the Pantages family that used to own the theaters all over North America. They started the polar bear swim. And I talked to Basil a couple of years ago. He was actually still going in the polar bear swim. That's like, it's now 2020, and that was about 5 years ago. And I sent him this song I wrote for him called Man About Town. It was a song I wrote for him, and he'd forgot all about it, but I resent it to him. He was so happy. I wrote it for a TV show that he did about what a guy he was. You know, he's like Mr. Playboy with all these. They always had all these hookers or escort girls. Ann Eichler used to know him. Ann from our next door neighbor's sister. Ann used to run around. She was sort of like a bit of an escort girl at one time too, I think. She used to hang around with that gang. Because I remember I went to a party one night at his penthouse, and Ann Eichler was there, and she told Lisa about it. Anyway, Basil used to come down with the gang to my piano bars, and they'd all come in, and they'd be buying drinks and partying, and but they did a TV show about him once on Rogers Cable. He came up in his, I think he had a Corvette or something, you know, He was our next door neighbor here was his cousin that used to live at where we live at Nickelwind. He was a Pantages that lived, forget his name now. Marcia said he always out smoking cigars and stuff like that. And Century Plaza, I played there a lot. I met Wally Hyde there. He owned a silver mine up in up in Alaska anyway. He owned a silver mine up there, and so he was kind of rich. He would gamble like crazy on the lottery. I remember he won $93,000 on it once. Another guy was Val Koppel, who used to hang around there. And Pat Burns used to hang around there. He was the radio DJ he was really a good DJ. He was like a super conservative, had a heavy talk voice. And he used to come down and drink in the bar. He lived upstairs in a penthouse apartment in the plaza. And he used to come down and drink down there. And we would, I'd ask him all kinds of questions. He was a nice guy. And then eventually, years later, I heard he died. And they said he used to wash all his socks out in the bathtub when they found him dead up there. And there was all these socks in the bathtub. He used to wash all his clothes in there. But he was pretty famous around Vancouver. And, Wally Hyde. Val Koppel, he owned all the Koppel cranes around there. And these are all in my Beach Towers days. He owned the Koppel Crane Company, and he used to always say, "Hey, Richard, if you ever need something, you just call me up." Yeah, right. And so years later, me and Bill Crompton did call him up, and it's like, "Oh, well, I think the stock market's not going too good right now," and, blah, 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 blah. Anyway, I remember once we were partying, and he said, "Come on, we're going over to the penthouse." And so we went over to I followed along we went over to the penthouse. It was the strip club in town where all the hookers hung out. And then, so he gets in there and starts buying drinks, and he had a big suite up in the Plaza Hotel, 2 Century Plaza. And so he hires, it was me and a couple other guys, his friends. So he hires these hookers to come over with us to the party at his house. And we all go up to his place, and one of the guys goes in with one hooker, and Val goes in with another hooker into the other room, and I'm left with the other hooker out in the living room, and I didn't know what to do. I was too chicken. And so I sat and drank with her. I said, "Well, you get paid anyway, who cares? Just have a drink and relax. It's easy." I sort of understand people like that from being an entertainer where you're hired to do things, One thing that happened to me once, now that I'm thinking of it, when I was downtown, I was drinking pretty heavy back then. I used to always have a Mickey, and I'd take shots before my gigs. And I was playing this, it wasn't the Wedgwood Hotel. I used to play there too, and she was a real bitch. That was her husband. I'll think of his name later and put it in. He was the one that signed Wayne Gretzky. He was a big high roller around town. I used to know him too. And he went broke, finally. I don't know whatever happened to him. I can't think of their names right now, but I remember her. She didn't like my CP80 piano when I took it in there, so she made me cover it over because it didn't quite classy enough. And you couldn't, you had to make sure you had a saucer under your coffee cup. And, God almighty. Anyway, there was another hotel I was playing downtown once. It was like super fancy, and it was a cocktail party, so I was nervous as heck. So I'm taking shots of rum or something before I go up there. And I get up there, and they got this, it's an upright piano, so I open the lid up to let the sound out better, and I put my keys up there, and I start playing the piano. My damn keys fall down inside the piano. Oh, no. And my old station wagon's parked out in the parking lot somewhere. I thought, oh, my God, what am I going to do? How will I ever get them out of there? And, how embarrassing. And so, anyway, I played the cocktail party. I'm not really good at that kind of thing. That's why I was so nervous. And so when I finished, I thought, oh my God, now, if they're in that bottom of that piano, what am I going to do? They'll really think I'm a real winner. So I went, I look inside the lid on the top of the piano because it's lifted up. And I guess I'd been so nervous when I came in, I just plunked my keys up there. They'd fallen in, but they ended up catching on a little ledge that it was halfway down the inside of the piano. So I got a chair and I got my arm in there and I finally got them out. Holy crap. Anyway, that was another little incident that happened. I remember that. I'll tell you about that Rob guy later. Anyway, he tried to blackmail me once about some stupid thing. It wasn't a big deal. We were partying or something. I wasn't even married at the time. I was split up. But I remember Johnny Parker, my friend, he couldn't blackmail. He was just going to say that I was doing coke or something, and I don't know. And so anyway, Johnny Parker came over, took a ferry over from the island, and he had a bag of pennies with him. He was going to hit the guy over the head with the bag of pennies and break his arm for trying to hassle me. And I said, Jesus, John, don't do that. Johnny used to say, revenge is best served cold. And then when I used to play there, I sort of tried to date this Heather Grant for a while. After I broke up with Lisa, I went for a long time. I didn't want to be with anyone because I felt guilty. I thought that we could get back together, And then she did come back down once, and sort of we ended up sleeping together, and then she started talking about let's go see a counselor and all that. But it was just too late. I thought, I'm not going to move back out to that damn house. I hated that place. And, I'd had a nice apartment by then. And, I was playing all the piano bars, and I just thought, you can't go back, And so eventually I went out with this girl named Heather Grant for a while. She used to be involved with this TV show out of Burnaby. I forget what it was called, Dance Party or something. And I met her through West, my friend, and she was out there she was working for White Spot, and she worked for them many years, got way high up in the company, and now she works for Toigo, whatever his name is, Ron Toigo, a big real estate company. I think she's still working. I used to date her for a while. We slept together a couple of times. I don't think we ever really did it, though. I think we just fooled around. And then I used to go to her house out in Richmond. She ended up marrying a guy that was sort of a musician, promoter guy. Her son was he worked for, I think, he was interested. They had all kinds of snakes and turtles and everything in the basement in these cages. He was like a biology type guy. I heard he ended up working at the aquarium. He hitchhiked around South America when he was very young, too. Anyway, I dated her for a while. And, what was that game? Wally Hyde was the guy that owned the silver mine, if I didn't mention it before, out of the Century Plaza. And I used to play this club. I think this is still in the Dogwood days, though. It was called the Pastime Club in New Westminster, and it was a little hole in the wall up above. New Westminster used to be a real rough place at one time, a lot of partiers and drinkers and drugs. And I played this place. It wouldn't open till 11 o'clock at night and go till 2 in the morning. And all the bars would close, like the Windjammer and the King Eddie and the Turf, where all the bikers hung out. They'd all finish work or finish the bar out there. They'd all come to the Pastime Club and Johnny Parker played bass with me, and I'd play the piano. And we'd start at 11, end at 2, and then we'd go next door, and there was a booze can there. The guy, a friend of ours, he was actually a singer too. I can't remember his name now. He ended up dying of cancer. That's too bad, because he was quite good. Anyway, we used to go up there and party till 4 or 5 in the morning. Then I'd drive home. I don't know if I was living at Dogwood or out in Maple Ridge, but anyway, there was no roadblocks in those days, so didn't worry. I never got in an accident anyway, but that pastime club was a real hole in the wall. There was an old guy named George that was the cook, and there was a big blonde girl that used to be the bartender, and the guy that owned it, he also owned the another hotel in New Westminster. I can't remember the name now. Anyway, he owned that too. It ended up being turned into a strip club bar. It was right near the pastime club. I can't remember his name either. Should have written it down. Anyway, around those days, through West, I met John Haynes, who we call Loke, and Leslie. She was a girl that West knew for years. We used to run into her once in a while. And another one of West's friends named Anne. She was the skinny one I talked about one time that always looked so unhealthy, I mean. And Loke is on the Christmas film showing Jesse how to vacuum. He was an American guy. He ended up eventually, he started doing heroin though and shooting up, and he got in trouble with the biker gangs over cocaine. And I used to go to his little house in the East End once in a while when he lived there, and he'd be snorting and smoking. He did a lot of drugs, and he started getting holes in his skin that I don't know if that's from the heroin or what. But he said he'd got involved with Agent Orange in Vietnam. He had been into Vietnam, and I remember he buried a submachine gun somewhere. He had a Sten gun, it's called. I actually looked at it once and held it. He buried it in his backyard once, and when he took off to the island to get away from the bikers, I went over to that house and dug holes all over the backyard. I didn't have a metal detector. I don't know why. Maybe they didn't have them out back then. If I would have had that, I would have found it. But he gave me a map, and I went and dug around, but I couldn't find the damn thing. And I think it was the owner or someone was there. He let me do it, but I wished I could have got that thing. Anyway, back in the days when I was still at Dogwood, me and Lisa split up a few times, and I remember staying at the Cecil Hotel. This is before my apartment in the West End when we split up for sure. I remember I stayed at the Cecil Hotel once for a few days or a week, and then me and Lisa got together, and then another time I split up with her for, I don't know, 2 or 3 or 4 months, and I moved in with West, my friend. He had a place on Hastings and Nanaimo above a bank. There was an apartment up there, and I moved up there and had a bedroom, and West used to do all kinds of artwork for me, like for Richard and the Hired Guns, and I had a big station wagon, and it was kind of nice living there. Their Olympic Tailors was up the street, and the markets is like an Italian area, and the markets up there were really neat. They had really good food. But West used to make, I still have pictures of some stuff. I used to wear this hat back then, and had a mustache, I think, still. And he used to do artwork about the Hired Guns. There's pictures on my Dogwood stuff. I guess I was still living at Dogwood. I don't know when me and Lisa were having a lot of trouble back then, I guess, and I moved in with West, but we ended up getting back together again. I enjoyed West, though. He was a neat guy. And I remember when we had the Richard and the Hired Guns. That band had Bobby Regan on guitar, Al Forsyth on drums, Johnny Parker on bass, me on piano and guitar, and West got together a group called, they were called I Dreamed I Died and Went to Heaven, Inspirational Singers. And so there was West, and there was Lisa, and another girl that was sort of friends of ours. And then there was a cheerleader from the BC Lions, and someone else. I can't remember who it was now. I thought I did a whole chapter on the Hired Guns. There it is. We had Bobby Regan on guitar, Johnny Parker on bass, Al Forsyth on, and then we had the Dreamed I Died and Went to Heaven background singers, or inspirational singers, that's what they were called. And we played the American Hotel, and we played we did a week at the American Hotel. There's some recordings of that somewhere, I think. And then we went to the Niagara Hotel and played there. And I don't think we went over too good there. I think we actually got fired or something. I don't know. But it was a good band, I thought. But my music, it wasn't their usual rock music that they were. It was rock music, but more of a blues, Jerry Lee style. So anyway, I made about 2 big trips or 3 trips up to the Queen Charlotte's, once when I was with Lisa and once or twice when I wasn't. And that's another whole big chapter, because that's a big chapter. That place is crazy and scary. Anyway, West used to live at the beach, across from the beach towers too. And I remember my mom came down there once, and there was a guy at the Century Plaza who used to come and drink there. And he gave me enough money to hire a limo for the kids' birthdays to take them around. And I got a film of that. And he wanted me to play his birthday party. And before the birthday party could happen, he died. But he'd given me the money already. So anyway, I used to... I took the kids, and the kids went on this big limo ride all over town. We went birthday shopping. I got a movie of that. Nana came down to see them. I used to play, in those days, I used to go over and play the Avalon in North Vancouver. I would go over there and play the piano bar from 4 till 8, jump in my car, drive over like crazy to the West End and play the Pacific Palisades from 9 to 1. And I did that for weeks on end sometimes. That's a lot of work. And, that was the days we were smoking cocaine sometimes. I don't know. I always made it through everything, though. Jesse experimented in all kinds of stuff, too, but that's growing up, But I played every big piano bar, all the hotels downtown for years, until what happened is the Sands Hotel, I used to play the Bayside Lounge, too. Remember seeing Jim Burns up there lots of times. We knew each other in those days. And the guy, one of the guys that, he was a black jazz player, used to come in and listen to me. And, I'll think about that later. But I used to play the Bosman Hotel, and it was downtown too, on, I think it's Hornby or one of those streets. And it was like a little hole in the wall, but it was always crowded. They had a piano bar in there. That's where I met Robin Olson. She is a beauty, and the kids loved her. She used to babysit my kids all the time, and we became lovers. We spent New Year's Eve together. That's the first time we ever got together and made love and stayed overnight together. Then I dated her for quite a while, and she was a real beautiful girl, blonde hair, beautiful smile, and really nice too. And then she moved into Beach Towers. I didn't want her to move in with me because it was too small. And Anyway, she got her own apartment down there. She used to be a courier driver and a waitress, like a bartender waitress, and she was real nice. I used to go down and sleep with her all the time, or she'd sleep with me, and the kids would stay with her. And I sort of, when I went on the cruise ships, we sort of broke up. She was always kind of mad at me, I guess. And then I came back once, and she'd thrown all my stuff out. I'd stored some of my stuff at her apartment. She went and chucked it in the dumpster. And I found my nice coat that I have from Dynamite Productions with my name on it, which I pulled out of the dumpster. I was real pissed off about that. Anyway, I still have that coat. It's got Richard on the front and a big logo on the back. I remember there was that's when I started swimming a lot, down and getting in good shape. They had a big pool in the beach towers, and I'd go down every morning and swim, and there was only a couple of old ladies in there doing their exercise or something. I remember meeting one guy in the beach towers. He was a ballet teacher. He'd taught the Winnipeg Ballet Company, and he'd taught all kinds of people. He was like a famous ballet guy. But I remember seeing his feet. They were so screwed up from being in those shoes. Because Chelsea used to take ballet when she was a kid. I went to her concert with the Nutcracker at the Queen Elizabeth Theatre, and I went to many shows at the Shadbolt Center that she did. And in fact, on the Dogwood TV, or the film I made at Dogwood for Christmas, I rented this big, huge camera. That's before they had good cameras back then. And I sang, me and Jesse sang together that one about, I don't know, where did my baby go? I heard she went to Idaho. But Chelsea wasn't in much of that film because she was at her ballet lesson. And I remember Mom stayed there then. My mother's in that film. But, what's the guy's name? Garner. Errol Garner was the guy that Bill knew that recorded House of Bamboo. And Linton Garner was the black guy that used to be downtown. And I also met Wes back then, not Montgomery. Wes Mackey, he's a guitar player, a blues guy that's around still. He used to play the Sands, and so did that other guy, another black guy that dresses like a zoot suiter now. And then I used to play the Best Western out in Coquitlam. That's where I met my good friend Ed Cerny. And Ed Cerny was, he's still a great friend of mine. He used to have a rock company that broke rocks. And so I don't know if I actually told the story about our trip to Nashville, but maybe I'll stop for a minute and then I'll get back to you. Oh, the other blues guy I was going to say was Kenny Wayne. I never thought he was very good. I didn't really. Wes Mackey I liked. He was a humble guy, but Kenny Wayne is a bit of an egotist, I thought. And he wears these big fancy outfits. He's actually playing gigs all over the world, billed as a great blues player, but he's never impressed me. I've even watched his recent videos. I'm better than he is. Anyway, not as famous, remember? The most famous guy in the world. I'm going to do a chapter on my trip to Nashville with Ed Cerny, but I have to remember a few names first. So this is just a short little footnote to my living in the West End at the beach towers. I'm going to do my cruise ships next. I was going to tell you about one more thing about Johnny Parker that used to play bass with me, the guy that used to say revenge is best served cold, the guy that was going to carve rat in someone's forehead once after he broke his arm and knocked him out. Anyway, I remember when he was drumming for us in the Hired Guns at the American Hotel, him and the drummer Al Forsyth got in a fight, and Johnny ripped the earring right out of the guy's ear. He also told me once when I was in trouble at one time, and one time I spent 30 days in a treatment center, going through, they did AA meetings and lectured you on drinking and drugs and all that stuff. And it got me off the road and the time to sort of dry out and redo my life. I wrote a bunch of gospel songs in there. I wrote that one, Les Law's favorite song, forget what it's called now. Anyway, I remember Johnny Parker. I spent time also in detox 2 or 3 times where I remember driving there drunk showing up in my car and just about falling out of my damn car. Good thing the cops never stopped me. And I even had a spoon a lady from Germany to give me that was an actual German World War II Nazi spoon that had been, half the spoon was missing on the end from the guy scraping his can out on the Russian front. And those damn people at the detox threw it out. Anyway, I spent some time in those treatment centers. That's when I started getting, studying the Bible and, getting more religious, and I started writing gospel songs. That song I was thinking of that Les Law liked is called Now, that I wrote in the treatment center. So, and I remember Johnny Parker once when I didn't really want to hang around with him much anymore, and I was sort of trying to stay straight, and he phoned me up one day, and I was kind of trying to make excuses why I didn't want him to come over and start playing with me again. And he said to me, "If you don't quit whining, I'm going to come over and give you something to whine about." That was old Johnny Parker. He got killed in I think he was passed out on a bus somewhere, some down this years later after I lost touch with him, and he, after the whine about thing, and he got in some kind of altercation with the bus driver, and they charged him or something with assault, and he didn't want to pay the fine. It was supposed to be a fine or something, and so he went to jail, the Fraser lockup out here in Coquitlam, to tell he was awaiting trial, and he got in some hassle with some Russian guy in there or something, and the guy picked up a TV and hit him over the head, and he died about 5 hours later in Royal Columbian Hospital. It's too bad. I remember getting a hold of his parents, because Johnny was actually responsible for me having all the Danny Tripper live tapes. He used to really like Danny Tripper too, and Johnny Messenger and these guys. John had some funny friends, but he used to bring me these Danny Tripper tapes, which I later on rescued and put them out for Danny Tripper live. They would have never been in the world. Danny Tripper is one of my very favorite guitar players in the whole world. So anyway, that's a little bit of extra about Johnny Parker. I don't know if I told this story before. I probably did, but Jumpin Johnny Parker, we called him Jumpin Johnny all the time. He was the guy that played bass with me sometimes. Roger Stomperud was really the main bass player I had. But Johnny used to come and play with me for free all the time because he wanted to play, and he's a guy that turned me on to Danny Tripper a lot, even though I already knew Danny Tripper before Johnny. But Johnny used to know this guy named Harvey Brown over in the Waverly Hotel in Cumberland, so we booked over there a bunch of times, and we'd go over there. They'd give us a room each upstairs. I took Robin once with me and romped around with her, Robin, my girlfriend. And then I used to go out to the lake there in Cumberland on the island. It's real nice around there. Remember, there was a Chinese restaurant we used to go and eat at, and the kids were little. They used to be studying their books in the restaurant while we were, that's where they did their homework, and their parents ran it. They made pretty good Chinese food. Anyway, I think Harvey Brown ran the Waverly. He was like the mayor of town, and me and Johnny played there. We'd play there for the weekends, and it was a pretty good crowd. There were a lot of heavy drinkers there, and there there was two brothers. One was named, I forget his real name, but they called him Mimi because when he was a kid, he used to be so greedy, he would always go, me, 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 when he wanted food. So they called him Mimi, and it stuck with him. But he was a real heavy alcoholic, man. He'd go out in the bush somewhere to a camp, and then he'd come in and drink all weekend. You'd go down in the morning, they'd be down there drinking, and they'd drink all day long and all night. And then he had a brother who, actually, I don't know if he committed suicide or he just passed out on the tracks and a train ran over him. But those were the Cumberland days with Johnny Parker, Jumpin Johnny. And Johnny, unfortunately, was, I think I told this story before, he got killed in the lockup at the Fraser lockup out here. Guy hit him over the head with a TV and killed him. Poor guy. Anyway, Johnny had his good points. So, Jumpin Johnny Parker. This is a story about some of my experiences in Haida Gwaii, which used to be called the Queen Charlotte Islands. I went up there, I don't know how many times, maybe 3 times. Once when I was married, that was the first time. And then the other couple of times I went up when I wasn't married anymore, I was split up. But that place is sort of magic and sort of weird and sort of scary. I used to go up there and I would play at the Singing Surf in Masset for sometimes a month or sometimes 2 weeks. And then I'd go down south to the Queen Charlotte Hotel and play there for Bernie. Herb Riddell owned the Singing Surf, and Terry Jacks used to go up there he had a fancy boat that you could live on. He used to go up there and party around with Herb. I think they were doing a lot of coke in those days, a lot of these people. But anyway, when I first went up there, I got off the plane and I can't remember what I was playing for a piano then. It wasn't my CP80 the first time. Probably my Wurlitzer still. And I went up to the hotel and booked in and, met everybody. I would go in that hotel. I had a room in this, it was sort of like a flat hotel, with a wing of rooms and stuff like that with this bar. And the bar had a sunken dance floor and a stage, and I used to play in there, and the room was okay. And I started to meet people. There was a guy named Sid. He was a big, huge guy. He was a bouncer there. And Sam, I think Sam's his relative. He was kind of a big guy too. They became sort of friends of mine. I remember they took me out the first day to this, when I got up there, to this place called 90 Mile Beach. It's this huge, long beach that stretches as far as you can see, all sand. And they told me stories about people finding gold coins up there, and Sam took me to another beach called Agate Beach. You could actually drive your car way up that 90 Mile Beach. People used to do that. I never got to do that, but he took me to this other beach called Agate Beach, which was unbelievable. There's all these beautiful stones, and I love stones, and so I used to pick up stones. I still have some of them. I think I lost some of them somewhere. And actually, I went fishing there once up in Masset. He took this old guy, I forget his name, I become friends with. He was one of the elders. They're all families up there. He took me over to the village once and showed me all the old totem poles and everything. And then he told me that salmon used to run so thick there, his elders told him that you could almost walk across the bay. And I actually went fishing in Masset once with a guy and caught a mud shark. That's all I caught. It was about 3 feet high or something like that when I held it up. And I got a picture of me somewhere with that thing. But Masset is, the people look very different in Masset than Queen Charlotte City. Charlotte City, And Skidegate, the girls are beautiful there. I mean, Skidegate, their features are different. Masset, they're more, well, I don't know how to say it, uglier, earthier, or something. But anyway, and they're very scary up in Masset. If you, I'll tell you this little story later about a party I went to up there. That was on my long after I was not married anymore. But anyway, it was good. But I remember them in Masset bringing in these big, huge halibut up there. Man, the things were probably, I don't know, it looked to me like they were at least 2 or 3 feet wide and maybe 3 feet or more high. They were frozen when they came off the boats. The steaks were huge because when you get a steak down here now, halibut, it's so expensive and they're so little. They must be catching real tiny ones because when I was up in Masset there, I'd go in the restaurant to have fish and chips. The pieces of fish were huge and beautiful. It's beautiful halibut fish up there. They told me that like the McDonald's used to come up and buy all the crap fish off them, like to make minced fish stuff, their fish cakes and all that, fish fillet. They buy all the shit fish, they called it. Anyway, one time I was sitting in that Masset or the Singing Surf Hotel in Masset. I felt an earthquake up there. It felt like the whole building, it went like crack. Like I thought a truck or something had hit the building. But I wrote a lot of songs up there, and I wrote "Running from the Law" up there, one of my best songs, and another one called "Native of This Land," and it was. I still like that "Native of This Land." It's kind of like a dirge, but "Running from the Law" is one of my best songs, and I recorded it. I don't know if I recorded it up there. I had a little pig nose amp and a little recorder, and I just mic'd the pig nose amp and sang it live. And it's actually still the best version. And up there, and I played at the Queen Charlotte Hotel after Masset. This is maybe the first times, can't remember. But the Charlotte Hotel was always packed too. The bars did really good up there, and I remember when I played the Charlotte Hotel the first time, there was this guy sitting at the bar, and the people to me, when you're a stranger in town and a white guy, it's pretty kind of weird, people all looking at you and wondering who you are, and I went through a lot of weird experiences in my life. It's kind of lonely being. And I had a room way up in this hotel. They were gutting the hotel. There was only one room, and you had to go up these stairs at the back and walk sort of through this dark area where there's like planks, and the walls are all been taken out, and there's one lonely little room up the top where I used to stay there. But I met this guy that was sitting in the bar. They said, "Don't talk to that guy over there. He's like one of the mean guys around here or something." So I went right over and started talking to him and became friends with him. His name was Ding Hutchinson. And he lived out in Skidegate, which is the native village outside of Queen Charlotte City. And I later on played a wedding out there for somebody. It was a big native wedding with all this food. The seafood up there is unbelievable. I also went to a dinner at someone's house one time where they had mussels and octopus and all kinds of stuff like that. I can't say I liked that too much, but the wedding was kind of neat. I played "Loving You" by Elvis and something else, I can't remember. But I used to go to Ding's house after we got to know each other, just trips later, and I got a picture of us sitting on his porch balcony and jamming out there. He liked Hank Williams. He played the guitar, so he wasn't really scary after all, but he was a guy that had some clout up there, because I was at a party once where these young bucks were kind of getting on my case, and people smashing beer bottles over each other's heads up there and stuff. And I kind of was getting scared, and Ding stepped in and told them a thing or two, and then they backed right off, you see. And another guy, Ding, carved my wife's wedding ring, Lisa's wedding ring, and he made a gold ring for her. She still got it, I guess. And he also carved a beautiful gold bracelet, which I gave to Lisa, which got lost eventually, unfortunately. I found, after me and Lisa broke up, I found Chelsea wearing it once, and I got so mad. I thought, well, how could she do that? And so I took that bracelet back, and then later on, when I was partying at Beach Towers one time, this Donna, the black girl I told you about before, I never used to sleep with her or nothing, but she used to use me for partying. And she gave it to a guy for collateral, and I never got it back. Pretty sad about that. It was a beautiful bracelet. I should have left it. Oh, well, that's another story. Things happen. Anyway, yeah, that was one of my trips up there. I also went to Port Clements, and I seen the big golden spruce that used to be up there. It was like revered by the natives up there as a magic tree. It was a huge, big tree, sort of golden colored. It was way out in the forest. This guy, I think it's Sam or somebody, took me out there. We had a hike out there to see it. And years later, some idiot went and cut that thing down. And he got in real big trouble for that. I'm telling you, the natives, they'd kill him if they found him. Why he did that, I don't know. But they did save some of the seeds that are at UBC, apparently. So that's one good thing. But I did see the tree. I had a picture of it somewhere, too, years ago. I don't know if it's still... I still have it. I remember one time when I was in Charlotte City, everybody was partying. Oh, another guy I met was Randy Price. He was a guitar player. He still plays guitar. He lives in Courtenay. And I think Sam lives up in Campbell River or somewhere nowadays. But when I was Randy Price, I got in touch with him a few years ago. But he still plays guitar. But he was sort of in messing around with guitars. But I was like kind of way ahead of those guys when I went up there. And they used to hang around me. But Randy's a really absolutely beautiful carver, too. They told me that argillite is a certain kind of rock that comes from the Queen Charlotte's black, that they carve things out of. You can only get it there. And some guy went and tried to dynamite part of it and cracked the whole part of that mountain, because that stuff's really valuable. And I remember one time when I was in Charlotte City, there was like 400 fish boats or something parked down below the hotel when they had they were laid off from fishing. Or maybe it wasn't 400, but it was a lot. And you could go down the dock and go from fish boat to fish boat, and they were partying. They'd come up to the bar where I was playing and buy all kinds of beer and take it back down to the boats and party down there. And when I was up there, these people invited me one day to come over to Sandspit, which is across where the airport is from Charlotte City, across the strait from the North and South Islands. And there's some hot springs on the South Island. I never got to them, though, but I heard there was an earthquake and something happened, and now they don't have those hot springs. They had those for thousands of years. But anyway, over to Sandspit, another story once when I was leaving there, I used to have these big, huge piano cases for when I used to take the CP80 up when I finally got it. It's heavy itself. It weighs, cripes, I don't know how many pounds, but I got these big plywood cases made of 3/4-inch plywood lined with foam, one for the big harp and one for the keyboard part. I'm telling you, those things must have weighed 600-700 pounds. I used to fly them up on this little plane up there. It took 4 guys to lift the big one, to carry the thing, and it was heavy then. They'd pick me up in a truck. I remember once I went to the airport there, and when I was drunk, they dropped me off, and the lady said to me, "You got anything you're in that suitcase there?" I said, "Oh, don't worry, I got no guns or bombs." That's not a good thing to say. She said, "You want to stay here? You're not getting in that plane?" I went, oh, no, I'm just kidding. I'm just kidding. I was half loaded, Every time I left there, just like I have nightmares about the cruise ships, trying to pack all your stuff up off the cruise ship to get off in the morning was such a bummer. You got all this junk to carry. You got to get it off the ship, out to the airport. And same there, take all this stuff over to the airport. But I got invited to a party one night when I was at the hotel, and they said, why don't you come over the next morning? Tomorrow morning we're having this big party because the blueback salmon are running. There are certain salmon that's only native to that part, the one river over near Sandspit. So I said, oh, yeah, okay. So I get up in the morning, we party half the night away. A lot of partying up there, I'm telling you. So I get up in the morning, take a cab out to the dock, and then I get a water taxi. Takes me all the way over to Sandspit, and then I guess I get another cab to get to this trailer. I go in there, they're all passed out all over the place. There's no party at all. What a waste of time and money. And I still had to work at night. And so anyway, when I was up there, they used to give me magic mushrooms. I had, this one guy gave me a bag of powdered magic mushrooms, and I used to take them at the hotel. I'd take a pinch about, before my last set, and it would start to get high when I'm playing, and then afterward, I was broken up with Lisa by then. I would, go in my room and listen to George Jones tapes and cry in the blues and missing my kids. And I remember, I also, I'll get back to that, but I went scuba diving up there once too, down at somewhere where I was out of either Charlotte City or Port Clements or somewhere. Guy took me scuba diving. And he had a whole extra outfit and everything, and we went down because I'd already learned how to scuba dive in the Caribbean. So, we went scuba diving, and or either that was before the Caribbean, I guess. So, I knew I was a good swimmer anyway, and I'd always snorkeled and everything. So, we put the outfit on. The water's freezing cold. He told me to pee in my outfit, keep me warm, and then we went and dove down. I don't know, 20, 30, 40 feet, and swam around, look at all the crabs. It's not like the Caribbean, though. And then I heard of, Joe Conroy, that used to be in a band with me called Hat Trick. That was another band we had for a little while with me and Joe Conroy from Black Snake Blues Band and Peter Sweetser from Foster Child. Me playing drums. We used to go up to Squamish and play. I remember once we went up to Whistler and went up the mountain and skied all day and came down, sat in the hot tub, and went back to Squamish. Man, we were so tired I couldn't play anyway. But up in Masset, I used to take these mushrooms. I also used to bring back seafood for Mr. P at the Sands Hotel. That was his name, Mr. Presley. I used to bring back all kinds of crab and abalone. I didn't like abalone, but I'd bring crab and abalone and some crab for me. Wondered why my fingers were sore sitting in the backyard at Dogwood in the early days there from cracking that crab. But anyway, in the later years when I went up there, after I'd been split up and everything, taking the mushrooms, wandering around in my room listening to George Jones, there was a girl that used to work at the front desk. She was the daughter of an RCMP officer, and I won't say how old she was because she wasn't that old, but compared to me at the time anyway. I was in my, probably, I don't know what I was, early 40s, late 30s, can't remember. It was after I'd split up with Lisa, because I went up there a couple of times after when I was by myself, and she used to come and sneak in my room after work, and I'd be finished playing. We'd dance around, no clothes on, and we never really made love, I don't think, but we did a lot of playing around and everything. And then I had one time in the later trips I had, Sid's wife came over and her sister, and partied with me in the room. I think she just had a baby, and she was still, breastfeeding or something. I kind of, Jesus. But anyway, I should put that in a different one, but that's the way it goes. So, anyway, there's a party I got to tell you about. It's the worst thing that ever happened to me, or one of the worst stories I ever heard about was in the later times I went up to Masset. I went to this party one night, and it was over at Sid's place, the big bouncer guy. And, of course, his wife was there. She was always after me. She was the one that was over with the sister at the hotel room. Anyway, I never really slept with her ever or nothing, but she was always after me. Anyway, we all partied and drinking, and they were talking about people busting bottles over each other's heads, and then we were talking about guns, and they said, Sid said, I'll take you out shooting tomorrow at the beach in the morning. We got the .357 Magnum, the sawed-off shotgun, and all this stuff. And we got partying so much, everybody lost track of everything, and I woke up in the morning, sitting beside his wife. Everybody's passed out. My pants are down to my knees, and hers are sort of down to her knees too. And I don't know what happened, but good Lord, I thought, oh my God, what's happened here? This is probably too much information for everybody, but this is a kind of a weird story. It's the creepiest thing I ever heard. Anyway, everybody was passed out, thank God, because I don't know, everybody fooled around and everybody up there. I wasn't married anymore anyway, but I didn't want to get killed by Sid. I hope he never hears this thing. And then when I straightened myself up and, got her to straighten up. I don't know what we'd done, but we didn't do anything much, probably played around or something, who knows. And then, so Sid gets up, gets his guns, and he said, I'm going to pick up this guy I know. So we stop and pick this guy up. He's a white guy with a big beard and dirty looking and like a hillbilly. Kind of like we'd see out of Deliverance, eh? And he jumps in the truck. He's got sawed-off shotgun and some guns, and we go out to this beach, and I thought, holy shit. I hope that Sid didn't know about me with my pants half down. He probably used me for target practice. Hey, Whitey, get running now. Anyway, we got to this beach, and on the way out, this hillbilly guy with the big beard, he's talking away, and, I don't know if we were smoking pot. I don't know, it's crazy days. He tells me this story. It's the ugliest thing. You probably get sick just like me. He told me he went out one time, and he shot this moose. It was a female moose, and it was looking at him. It was still half alive. He went up and fucked it when it was dying. Now, I don't know what you want to think about that, but it's pretty sickening, eh? And anyway, we went out to the beach and shot the guns off the three. Anyway, I didn't get shot or killed. So that's that story. Boy, still makes me shudder. Anyway, here's another little story. I used to play at the Army Navy Club for many years in North Vancouver. I played there in the Eagles Club, and I met a lot of people over there. I met this one girl. She was from the North Van, what are they called? The Squamish tribe, I guess they are. Anyway, she, from the Native Indians, she wanted me to, she talking about designing an Indian center for the arts for them. I can't remember her name. She had a little son named Eli, and he had leukemia. And anyway, I wrote a poem for him when he died, and it's on a grave up in Squamish at the little Indian graveyard out of Squamish, with my poem on it that I wrote for him about. I think they got a picture of a horse with wings or something. It was like, your spirit's free and flying away and all that. I got the poem written down, and with a thank you note from the Squamish Indian Band for writing them that poem. And we designed this thing. West, my friend, and his friend Leslie, the girl, she was sort of a business person, and Chris Blades, he was an artist. So I got this team together to design this building for this girl over there whose son was Eli. Now, I wish I could remember her name. She used to live with one of the guys from Powder Blues, the horn player, one of the horn players. And they lived down on the reserve down there. There used to be a hotel down on that reserve where I saw Lou Rawls at one time, the jazz guy. Anyway, so we get this proposal. I get Chris Blades to draw up the whole proposal, and I've still got the map or the plans that he drew. I told him what we wanted in it, and he drew up this big thing with totem poles out the front, and it was going to have a recording studio in it, and a thing for kids to learn how to do, like TV and recording, and maybe a workshop for building things and stuff like that. So Chris Blade drew up a beautiful big design. It was a wonderful looking thing, and then we went over to the council meeting with the Squamish Indian Band and presented it to him. Chief Dan George, who I used to know from the movies, I used to see him drinking down in the bars watching the strippers downtown. There used to be a strip bar in Granville. I can't remember the name of the place. But anyway, his son had taken over, Leonard George. Now, he's died since, too, but he was chief, too, for a while. And so we presented this proposal to him with this big thing. It was going to cost about, I forget, $15 million or something like that. But they get government funding. But what happened is they turned us down. West was drinking a lot in those days, so we didn't take him to the meeting because we thought we didn't want him to, But he was always pissed off about that anyway. But we presented this thing, and then they said no. And then a few years later, they actually built the actual just about exact building down on the thing without our help and without our input. They sort of stole our design. So anyway, that was that trip. Another trip I made was up to Watson Lake. This is another weird trip. I went to the airport. Seagull Entertainment booked me to Watson Lake. I was supposed to go for 2 months up to this hotel, Watson Lake Hotel. There's a video I did of it up there. It's on YouTube. And so I get to the ticket down to the airport with all my junk. I got my, the same old thing, 7 big cases full of crap, all these chords and songbooks. You didn't have computers much in those days. And my guitar and all the amps and, cripes, all kinds of stuff. I get to the airport in a cab. I got to cart it all by myself through the airport. And I get to the thing and I go, where's my ticket? They said, we don't have a ticket for you. What? Oh, it's in the wrong name. So then I have to phone Seagull, and they got to do all this run around. So I think I missed my plane or something. I can't remember. Finally, I thought, this is starting off wonderful. So finally they got my ticket ready. And so I flew up to Watson Lake. It's like a little hole in the wall. One thing neat, they got a place there with all these signs pointing how many miles it is to this place and that place, this place, that place. So I get up there and go to the hotel, take my stuff in, get it all set up, and go up and get my room and everything. It's like 35 below up there. And they do have a hot springs up there, too, that people go to, but I never went to it. I made a video up there with this father and son they were from California staying there. And there was another guy there that used to be in the legislature up there. He had a lodge somewhere outside of Watson Lake that you could only fly into. And he used to come in the winter. He used to run the lodge all summer. I forget what he was, Speaker of the House up there or something in the Yukon at one time anyway. But he had this lodge that was really isolated. But he'd come in and he'd start to drink in there, and he would drink like day and night for weeks or something. I remember him; he was always drinking till he'd get himself sick, I guess, eventually. And there was like real weird people up there, little, bunches that hated the other bunch and liked the other bunch. And I used to play the lounge, and then I'd go next door, and there was a cabaret there. There was a band. We used to go over there, and then I ran a jam at the lounge for a while, and that kind of gets out of hand. You get all these weird people want to get up and sing, and then I forget I got into some. There was I went to a party once, and a guy's sleeper out the back. It wasn't a party, just him and me went out for a drink. He showed me the sleeper in his big truck, one of those transport trucks. It was kind of a fancy one in the back. It had a bed and a bed that sort of like a bench thing that you sit on, I guess, when he could sleep. And they leave the trucks running up there 24 hours a day. It's so cold. And then there was these weird girls that hang around the hotel, and I ended up getting in a disagreement with two of them at the end when I finally got sick of that place. But there was another weird girl that used to come around there. I was kind of attracted to her. She was kind of neat looking, and but she was kind of strange too. And I sort of stuck up for her a couple of times. The other girls hated her, you see. And then she actually came up and knocked on my door one day, but I didn't answer it. And the other girls that didn't like her, I ended up getting in a hassle with them, and they reported me to the boss that owned both hotels. And so eventually I finally quit that gig, walked out. They held me over for 2 extra months. I was up there for 4 months, but man, talk about drinking up there, boy. They drink and drink and drink and drink and drink. And I partied along with them sometime, most of the time, but I had to still work, so it got so all I did is sleep all day, hung over, and get up, go down, start drinking again, and play all night till I got, so sick of that place. I remember going to a party one time, and there was a lady up there. She made me a big banner. I still got it. It says Richard Stepp on it with all these stars and everything. I remember we all passed out somewhere one night. I think she'd peed her pants because it was all wet all over the place. That happened a couple of times with her. I guess she had a problem with that or something. And anyway, I finally got so pissed off of that place, I packed all my stuff up, told the guy to screw off, and I took myself out to the airport and flew my way back home. And another gig I went and played is up in Sparwood, another place minus 35. It was a piano bar. I had my station wagon, and on my way up, this damn sanding truck with rocks, gravel or whatever, it went by and sprayed all the side of my car, the damn asshole. And I got up there and parked my car. I went down. It was always weird going to these new places, because I'm a little bit shy, actually. And you go in there, you don't know anybody, right? So you sit at the piano and start singing, and all these people are checking you out, looking at you, You try to win them over, right? It's like, it's not a real fun thing to do, I'm telling you. I did it for many years at many places. Once you get a few friends, it's okay, but break the ice. But it's actually really scary. Going to a town all by yourself and don't know anybody. And then you always run into tough people and assholes and, nice people. Usually I'd find someone that would sort of protect me or something. But when I parked my car up there, I was actually going out in the morning jogging. It was minus 30 or something, or 35. My car froze up and wouldn't start. And I couldn't even get the doors open at first. And finally, I forget how I did that. I got the door open, got in. It wouldn't start. And ran the battery down. And then this guy that was in the bar, he decided he's going to help me. So he comes there and he gets another battery and he hooks it up. We still couldn't get it started. So then he said, well, I got to take this thing up and put ether in it. That'll get it going. So he gets in there and he puts some ether in, poof, like that. flame comes out of the carburetor. Does that a few times, and then he put too much in, and it goes boof like that, singed all his hair and eyebrows and everything. And we still didn't get it started. So anyway, finally, what we had to do is we had to get the car towed to a garage to get it all thawed out. So anyway, there was something I forgot to tell you about this. Was Ed Cerny, my friend that I went to Nashville with. Maybe I'll put this in separate. Okay, that's my weird stories for you. This is a story about different biker gangs. When we were in the Northwest Company, once we went up to Powell River and played up there for a 101 Nights dance. And they were the bike gang, the local bike gang. And they parked all their bikes around inside some of them anyway, inside the dance hall. And we had this big dance party. I told this story earlier in the Northwest Company, but we went to their party after at their clubhouse. It was a big party, and I don't know, we all got drunk, and then we went down the basement. They had a place down there with beer, cases of beer all piled up against one wall, and a bar, and then you could sit on chairs and shoot handguns at the dirt wall on the other side. So we had a lot of fun doing that. And then at the end, everybody got so drunk and passed out all over the place. Gowan took a case of beer off their pile and took it with us when we left. And we had Roy Hennessy and Daryl Burlingham were up there with us, the two disc jockeys from Seafun. They used to come out and bring records and everything. They'd come to our dances, and it was like a big celebrity deal when, kids hear these guys on the radio all the time. They were more famous than the band. And they were always after groupies and everything too, so they would throw out stuff for them. And then I remember the tribesmen up in Squamish. They were the local gang up there. They used to hang around the Squamish Hotel where I played. I can't remember what their names. I remember one guy went up to one of the guys once and told him he'd like to screw his wife, and they beat the heck out of him. But they were always nice to me. They liked my music, and so they were cool. As long as you didn't bother them, they didn't bother you. Anyway, and then there was the Rebels from Edmonton. They used to come to our gigs at the Kingsway Hotel, and they had a big guy named Tiny, of course. And he was a huge guy that they would sit up and watch the Northwest Company play. And I remember something happened one time where some of my cymbals or something fell over, and old Big Tiny came up there and put them back up for me. He was kind of a nice guy. And he was they always protected our band, And then another time I went to Saskatoon, and the ones up in Edmonton were called the Rebels, and the Saskatoon ones were called the Rebels too. And I went up to Saskatoon to play for a week at the Riviera Hotel across from the Bessborough. And I used to go to this club at night called Bud's on Broadway, which is it's like a blues club. It was a really good club. I'd go there at night after I played and have drinks and stuff. And I met a guy named Neil up there. He was with the Rebels, the bike gang. So I don't know, I got friendly with them. I always kind of liked bikers because they always treated me nice. And so they invited me over to their clubhouse for drinks after Bud's on Broadway closed. So I went over there, and they had a pool table and a bar and a bunch of girls all standing around and drinking and everything. I started talking to the president. I don't know where Neil went, but he was one of the members, though. But we got talking away and bullshit, and I don't know if we were snorting coke, who knows. Anyway, when it got to be about 3 or 4 in the morning, most everybody had already left. I'm still talking to the guy. And then I start talking politics, saying, yeah, I don't think you guys should join up with the Hells Angels because they're trying to get all these biker gangs to join up with you. I think you guys should stay with your own name, the Rebels. And so anyway, I'm talking to him, and then finally he said, I think you better go now, Richard. So, okay, I thought, so I better get out while the going's good. So anyway, he led me back out. He got all these locked doors, and then they got a walkway between these fences with these dogs in there, big, ugly Rottweilers or something. And then he lets me out the front door, and here I am standing out in the middle of nowhere. I don't know where the hell I am in Saskatoon. And so I guess I walked for a ways until I got somewhere and caught a cab back home. Anyway, that's my little biker story. Okay, this is a little bit more about bikers. There was Terry Seifer, my best friend in Sicamous when I was a kid. He became a member of the Catwalkers out of Burnaby, North Burnaby, and then later on became a Hells Angel. And I met him down in the Garage nightclub years ago when I played in the Northwest Company. He was a bouncer then, and I hadn't seen him for years. I told that story earlier. Another guy that used to be my protector was Big Mike. I forget his last name. He called the Schnoz. He was in the first So You Want to Fight show at the down at the PNE at the Agrodome or something. All the bikers showed up, and the Schnoz got up to fight this professional boxer, and the boxer beat him up. But anyway, he was a street fighter, not a boxer. But anyway, he used to be a nice guy. He used to always tell me, if you ever need help, Richard, you phone me up. Here's my number. And he did that for years, even after I was living in Beach Towers and playing piano bars. I seen him down at the Bayside once. He gave me his number again, said, don't forget, you ever need me, phone me. Then I seen him years ago in the Travelers Hotel. After that, I seen him. I was over there with Brian, my friend, Brian Great, and I saw him sitting over there at a table full of bikers, full of Hells Angels, because he was president by then out of the East End chapter. And I said, watch this, Brian. And I went over and I tapped him on the shoulder, and I said, hey, get out of my chair. And all the bikers, look, hey, we'll kill this guy. And anyway, I said, hey, Mike, how you doing? Buddy, hey, come on, sit down. He was so nice, that guy. And then he got shot once in the Cobalt. I heard somebody shot him. And then years later, he died of something, probably from too much cocaine and stuff. Another guy was Ross McClellan. He was the banker for the Hells Angels out in Maple Ridge. And Brian used to tell me he'd come in the store. He had a guy with him named the Gyrator. And he used to order all this food from Brian to get sent out to the clubhouse out in Maple Ridge, which he owned. And one time a guy tried to rob his store, and Brian and Ross took him out and actually hit the guy so hard he hit his head on something and died. Anyway, Brian used to, I think I told this story about Brian Great in one of my earlier things. But Ross McClellan, actually, his mother was my mom's friend or cousin or something up in Mara, the Koskamakis. I know I told that story earlier on something. But anyway, another guy was Brian Binns. He was that was from the bike gang that hung around the Turf Club. He used to come in. Last time I saw him, he had a T-shirt saying, I beat anorexia. But anyway, yeah. So I told all the stories before, and I don't know when I told them, but I'm sure I did about, Ross and Brian. And Brian, the McClellan sister, that I was in the treatment center once with his sister Shelley, and she was like a schizoid. She still is. She married she got involved. She broke up with her husband, got involved with some drug addict, and then she got the drug addict to go try to rob Ross's Super Value. And Brian took him into the office to go into the safe, and then Brian jumped on the guy, and they wrestled him. He wrestled him down and pissed his pants at the same time till the cops came. So anyway, that was another little story about the gangs. But I always liked them. They always were pretty cool, and they, like at the Pastime Club, Sonny was the owner of the Pastime Club. I forgot that. They would come in and they'd all drink and have fun just like everybody else. They like music, so okay. Some of the bands that I remember from Vancouver, well, of course, from Salmon Arm, it'd be the Shadracks from Kelowna or Penticton, and the High Fives, I think they were called, High Fives. The Sea Fun Classics, the Nocturnals, the the Vancouver Playboys, Little Daddy and the Bachelors, Jason Hoover and the Epics, The Night Train Review, Mother Tucker's Yellow Duck, Motherhood, Seeds of Time, United Empire Loyalists, My End Old Ring, Papa Bear's Medicine Show. That's enough. Okay, this chapter here is about the ending of my beach towers days. Things were getting tough around town for playing the piano bars because karaoke started coming in where people could go and sing along with, piano bars used to be the sing-along idea at first, even though I kind of played them without, I did some sing-along, but it wasn't, you'd sort of entertain people, at the piano. And they were all over the place. The biggest, that was a rage for a while. I was booked every week solid, and then what happened is the karaoke came in, got big in Japan where it started, and then it took over Vancouver, and all these places that used to be piano bars, they thought, well, why the heck do we need a piano player? We just get a karaoke machine and everybody can sing. And they became so popular that it wrecked the piano bars. And by that time, the roadblocks and the non-smoking in bars, because all the time I was in the piano bars, you could smoke and everything back in those days. And when that smoking thing came in, banning the smoking and roadblocks, everything, scaring the heck out of people at Christmas time, and then roadblocks all year round, it absolutely ruined the bar scene. So a lot of the entertainers ended up going on cruise ships. I remember hearing a few people tell me the nightmare of cruise ships, how they don't go on those things. Because I remember seeing the band years ago on that Arcadia I went to New Zealand on. But anyway, my agents were, I was starting to miss weeks where I'd have no gig, and that never happened to me before. And all the bars and the bands were getting less and less and less, and so my agent was booking cruise ships. All the agents started booking the cruise ships. They became big because it was easy to book someone on a cruise ship, and then they get a steady money coming in. I think I made $2,000 US a month plus room and board, and that's in the early 90s. And so the agent loved that. He can just sit back and collect the money months and months at a time. He didn't have to do any work. And so I was booking through John Whitefoot at the time. I used to book through Siegel Entertainment for years too, Bob Siegel and his brother. His brother's a bass player around town. He's actually quite good. Bob's a good guitar player too, but anyway, I don't know if they're still going. I guess they are. Jan, it was his brother, Jan Siegel. Anyway, things were getting bad around town. I was trying to pay maintenance payments to Lisa. I think I was paying her $300 a month or something, and I just couldn't make enough money to pay that anymore. And she was living at home for free, and with her parents were paying for everything. Kids were going to school, and my life was going to crap because I missed my kids so much. I love my kids so very much. I love Chelsea and Jesse, and they used to come in and stay with me and at the Beach Towers. They loved it there, and I missed them so much. My heart breaks the rest of my life from breaking up. I don't know what to say. I'm heartbroken about that. Still am, always will be. But I love my kids so much. So anyway, what happened is I got an offer to go on the cruise ships. I tried it once with Roger as a trio, or maybe that was later. We did that, but we did a lot of drinking back in those days and everything. But anyway, I decided I'd go on the cruise ships and give my apartment up so I could pay the maintenance, because I couldn't afford to go on the cruise ship, pay for the maintenance and keep my apartment and save any money. I guess I maybe could have, and that's what I should have done, because that was another huge mistake. Because when I'd come off the cruise ships, I had no place to live. So I'd come into town, I'd expect my agent to have jobs for me, and he never have any jobs, probably on purpose, because he knew I'd be forced to go back on the ship. And so I'd stay in a motel out in Coquitlam with all my equipment crammed in the room, And I got real depressed doing that, I'm telling you. I'll tell you about that later. But anyway, the first days of the cruise ships were good. I remember West made a big banner for Bon Voyage. He painted this big banner. I actually still have the banner upstairs in my collection of stuff. And he had it up in my apartment, and everybody was excited. And anyway, so I go to the airport with all this stuff, and I'll have to tell you about my Watson Lake trip sometime too. Anyway, I went to the airport, and I had like a big my Roland FP8 in a big case, which is like 6 feet long, 5 feet long or something, and heavy. Then I had a trunk full of chords and another trunk full of songbooks and chords and songbooks. And then my luggage I had to buy a tuxedo and this sort of a ship-looking coat and all these clothes with white pants, and had to buy all this junk anyway to take on the ship. So I had about 7 big heavy pieces of stuff that I had to lug out there. But back in those days, they didn't, if you told them you worked on the cruise ships, they just let you through. They didn't search your luggage or nothing. And they didn't even charge, they didn't charge you for for taking all that heavy stuff on the plane. Things have certainly changed from then. So anyway, the first time I left, I got on the plane. I forget where we landed. We flew from Vancouver to somewhere and then down to Puerto Rico. And I got off at Puerto Rico, and I'm all confused, of course, because I never did this before. And it happened in New York, too, once. These ships, you see, when they get into port, everybody takes off into port, and you can't get a hold of anybody that works on the damn ship. And so it happened in New York once, too. I landed at the airport with all my junk, and there's nobody there to meet me. I didn't know in those days people hold signs up sometimes with your name on them, but there was nobody there to meet me. I ended up having to load all that crap. I did it in Puerto Rico, too. Put it all in a cab. The poor cab driver, it's like 7 huge pieces, and takes me down to the docks in Puerto Rico, where the big fort is and everything. And I should know the town, but anyway, it's the main town where all the docks, the cruise ships dock, and there's my big cruise ship sitting there. So the cab drops me off, and I go on there, and it's the Regent Sun, the cruise ship. I made a film about it. I was on it mostly of all the cruise ships. I worked on Princess, Carnival, and Regency Cruises. I can't remember if I did any other ones. Maybe Celebrity, I don't know. But Regency was the main ship I worked on, and it was 850 passengers. I had the main lounge, and the lounge had a casino. Anyway, when I got there, I got off the dock with all my equipment. Then I have to go on the ship, tell them who I am, and they said, "Oh, I think the cruise director's gone into town for a while. I don't know, maybe he'll be back by, and I have to play that day. I mean, God, this is terrible." And so finally someone said, "Oh, bring the stuff on board, okay?" So I lug all this stuff by myself, one trip after another, sweating like crazy. It's hot as hell down there. I get it all on the ship. And then you can't use the elevators. Staff can't use them. There's stairs. And so I wait around on the ship. Finally, somebody shows up. You got to play at 4 o'clock. Normally on the cruise ships, I would have to play in the afternoon. on port days at 2 o'clock till 3, and then I'd play 4 to 5, and then 6 to 7, then 9 to 10, and 11 to 12 or something like that. 5 sets, 1 hour each. And then I did that for months and months at a time, 7 days a week. No wonder I went crazy. But anyway, the first day, so finally someone says, okay, your room's downstairs. It's like 4 or 5 floors down. Can't use the elevator. I got to haul all this stuff down, one trip at a time. You know, these cases are heavy, probably weigh 30, 40, 50 pounds, some of them. So I drag them all down into my room, get them in there, unpack, change as quick as I can to put my fancy clothes on and go up, play my first set as we sail out of port. And then I was so tired that I'd flown all day. And, I'd gone to the airport in the early morning in Vancouver, packed all that stuff by myself, flown all day, nobody to help me. Got down there, took the cab to the ship, packed it all in the ship, packed it down the 4 or 5 flights of stairs to my room. At least I had my own room with my own shower and my own steward. And then I went up and played my set and played that night. I had to play 4 one-hour sets. And so then I, finish. They have a midnight buffet on the ship that you can go to. I went there, I guess, and got something to eat, went to bed, get up in the morning. Then we're out at sea. And I think, oh, this is great. And it was great. I had a really good time the first couple of years. It was so neat because you didn't have to, once you're on the ship, you can get into the routine and you don't have to, pack all that equipment like in town here where you're setting up all the time and tearing down, or in a band where you're on the road with a van and the cold weather and, setting up every night and all this equipment. I didn't need lights or anything. I had my piano, the grand piano, with my CP80 on the top I could use for strings and organ and a little drum machine with me. And so I could just go up there every day and play. And, we were in the tropics, so it was, sailing along. I could see the flying fish out there jumping, flying on the water, and sometimes dolphins, and, and the sunsets in the Caribbean are just beautiful. And these clouds down there. Now I'm missing it. Anyway, I had a really good lounge, and there was a duo on the ship called 49th Parallel. That was Drummond. Evil Eye Smith, his name was. He was the bass player. He was the guy that had doctor in every port with pills. I tell that, I think, on my story about the shadow that I saw on the ship eventually. When a guy had died, there's a shadow went through my room. I got a whole chapter on that called The Shadow. Anyway, the ship was nice. I met lots of people on there, and the thing that was nice about it is that you'd get a different audience every week. There's some would stay for 2. I met one girl named Marilyn there on the ships. She used to come on purposely just to see me. She lived down in Philadelphia, I think it was. She was a kind of a skinny girl, and she used to smoke constantly, lay out in the sun. I guess she's like a groupie. And, I don't know, I met another one, I can't remember her name. I used to sneak them down to my cabin at night, and we'd mess around down there for hours, and then she would have her own, Marilyn had her own cabin. I would go there. And then I met this other lady from New York named Angela, and she used to come on board with her husband then, but then she'd fool around with me. She'd come down to my room and screw around with me all night long. And, oh God, she used to send me all kinds of cards and stuff from New York, and when they lived in New York, so... and then when I played the other circuit up out of New York to Montreal on the ships, she used to come up there, and I used to play a circuit where I was in New York, stationed there, and we'd go up to Bar Harbor, Newport, Halifax, up to Quebec City, Montreal, and I don't know if we went to Montreal, Quebec City, I think, and then we'd turn around and come back. I'll talk about that more later. But anyway, I met Angela. She used to come on a lot. And then eventually she rented an apartment in Vancouver, but her and her husband. And finally he died years later, and I still send her a message once in a while, but we messed around a little bit, but she was kind of strange. But anyway, he always had girls on there. The gentleman hosts used to pick up the ladies too. A lot of girls go on there to meet guys, And so anyway, I used to sneak them down. One thing I did do there is I was about, I guess I was in my 40s somewhere, and late 40s, I don't know. I slept with an 80-year-old woman once on the ship, and she was a lot of fun. And now I don't think 80's too bad because my wife's 88, and she's still nice. But the guys, they teased me so bad. Oh, ho, 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 I slept with an 80-year-old. I said, she was a lot of fun, She used to talk to it, and anyway, that's another thing. But probably too much information for the children. And they're not children anymore, so it doesn't matter. And we had a lot of fun. And then we used to party up in this room. The radio guy, he was an East Indian guy from India. He had a little room upstairs by the bridge where the captain lived. And he had his own room up there, his own fridge and everything. I think I was sort of hanging around with that 80-year-old. That's where I met the 80-year-old. But she didn't act 80. She acted like she was about 50 or 60. She used to dance, and she was in real good shape. So anyway, we used to go up there and party half the night. And the orchestra on the ship was a bunch of Polish guys. And there used to be a cruise bar a crew bar on the ship. So we used to go there a lot, and all the old Polish girls are in there dancing around, and they like to drink a lot because the Polish guys, we used to go down to their room and drink vodka with 1 drop of honey in it. And they would have these big plates of pickled fish and all this stuff. But they were really good musicians, and they used to, them and the girls that worked on the ship, they used to send all the money home to Poland, to pay for things. They told me I looked like Sobolski. He's a Polish actor that I think he got killed by a train or something, but he had dark glasses like me and sort of dark hair. I guess I sort of did look like him. One of my good friends on there was the staff captain. He was a sort of a redheaded guy. He would come down to my dances all the time, and also that's where I met the guy that died, the guy that I saw the shadow go through my room that night. But I did all the islands in the Caribbean. I did Puerto Rico, Jamaica. I actually went to Jamaica twice with that Marilyn. She actually paid for my trip down there to the Sandals in Jamaica. We went to Montego Bay once in Negril and stayed for a week down there. That's where I learned how to scuba dive. I took a scuba diving course down there and did about 4 or 5 dives. We used to go up to Ricky's where they filmed 20,000 Leagues Under the Sea. And there's a bar there in a cave that you can go up the stairs and dive off the top. Anyway, I did 40-foot dives down there because I always swam. I also, in the Charlottes, I went scuba diving up there. And it's cold water up. The guy told me to pee in my suit. Keeps you warm. Anyway, Jamaica, I got offered a gig at a rum plantation in Montego Bay when I was there once. But they were going to reopen this estate up in Montego Bay where it used to be the Ballantyne's Scotch, I guess it was. No, it was a rum place. Anyway, it was a rich family down there, and it had been abandoned years ago, but somebody owned it, and they were talking about having me come down to play do a piano bar thing up there, but I guess it never happened. I went to Curacao, Venezuela. We went to Curacao in Venezuela, where my pill-popping friend nearly got us arrested by, I think I've told these stories before, but anyway, we went into town to get pills. he wanted to get pills. He had a doctor in every port. He was popping a lot of Percocets and Percodons and whatever he could get his hands on. And I remember he used to stay in his room with his lights off, listening to music all the time. His roommate used to complain. He had like all these towels from sweating. Good Lord. Anyway, we went in there and he asked this guy for some pills or something, and the guy went and got him something. He ripped the guy off somehow, and all of a sudden these two big guys show up with machine guns and strapped over, AK-47s or something, talking to us about what happened, and they're going to arrest us. So we ended up, thank God, got back to the ship. That guy was a real screw-up. That was that evil eye, Drummond Smith. He used to be in quite a few bands. I think his duo was called 49th Parallel, but he was actually quite famous in his own right. I think I looked him up once. Maybe I'll put a footnote later. But I went to Aruba. Aruba I loved. It was a beautiful island. The markets down there, they got these huge, papayas and everything. St. Bart's, St. Martin, St. Croix, St. John's, Bahamas, Barbados, St. Lucia, St. Kitts, Montserrat. I remember going out to the St. Croix. I remember going out to the nude beach, topless beach in those places, St. Croix and Montserrat. And they're sort of, the Montserrat's French, but there are a lot of girls walking around with no tops on. That was pretty interesting, sightseeing. And then when I was in St. Croix, I remember an interesting story once. I was coming back from the nude beach, or it's not nude, it's just topless, but walking back, and I could hear this music, and it's an old church with all these black people in it. And they're wanging away on the guitars, and they got the tambourines, and they're singing and singing this, gospel songs. What a great sound. Anyway, I did about 6-7 years on the cruise ships until it drove me crazy, being away from my kids. I couldn't stand it. And also, I couldn't record on there. I couldn't write songs. You're working so many hours a day. 4 or 5 1-hour sets a day is a lot of playing. And I was, I didn't drink. Lots of times I didn't drink. I remember when I did drink on there, I got so screwed up I had to drink to get going to go to my gig. The time I saw the Shadow on there, I wasn't drinking though. I think I only had 1 beer. And I wasn't drinking heavy. I used to go on and not drink because I was getting in trouble with too much drink and then in depression. I remember one trip I was in New York. I had to play on the deck as we were going on the last day, and God, I was so drunk. I was embarrassed to think about it. I was probably people knew I was drunk too because people can always tell by your voice, But I used to, it started to drive you crazy after there. I used to go on and not drink too for long periods, but then, and then everything went good when I didn't drink. One time when I was drinking, I went down to my room with this little cleaning guy from Jamaica, and he ripped me off for $2,000 out of my coat, and I couldn't prove it. I looked everywhere in my room for days, and he was the only guy in my room, but then people have pass keys in there. I should never have taken my tuxedo off and left it in my room because we'd gone back up to the crew bar, you see, so he might have slipped it out. I was playing him music, we smoked a joint in there, which is a real no-no on the ship. But anyway, we did a lot of the islands, and then another trip I did is out of New York. Went New York, Bar Harbor, Newport, Halifax. I said that before. But New York was great. I used to walk uptown all the time. They had a lot of weird porno shops in those days. Good Lord, people doing all kinds of horrible things. Well, not horrible, but some of them were pretty gross stuff that I'd never seen anything like that before. But I enjoyed walking around Times Square, and they had guys doing card tricks. And I remember buying so many beautiful ties there, all silk ties from Italy. And they were like, I don't know, 3 for $20 or bucks or something like that. They're cheap as heck, you know. So I used to buy ties there, and I had a lot of nice clothes then that fit me real good, tuxedo and, you know, all kinds of clothes. I used to buy all these real nice shirts when I was down in the Caribbean that were like Hawaiian-style shirts. And I ended up, when I finished with the cruise ships eventually, I ended up giving all my suits and everything because I gained weight. I thought, I'll never wear them again. I gave them all to the Salvation Army in a great big box, and I'm sorry I ever did that. That's another big clothing thing I did after throwing away all my rock and roll clothes when I split up with Lisa. Anyway, I did all the islands, and we did the Quebec City was really nice. I like that place. It's the old, where we docked in Quebec City. There was, I think I mentioned this before, when we were in Bar Harbor, there was a lot of gay people there. There was a jewelry store called the Family Jewels. Good Lord. And then Quebec City, I remember going up drinking beer up there. It was, gee, they have beer that's 15 or 18%. The clubs up there. But I liked Quebec City because it was got so much history. And when I was in Montreal, I played a piano bar out there once. I used to go up Mount Royal, but Quebec City, you can look over the St. Lawrence from where they had the war between the English and the French there, the Plains of Abraham, and the old Quebec City is really neat. It's like very old-fashioned, all old stone buildings, and they got a farmer's market there that people just speak French in. It was kind of, I really liked it there. And they have a little ride up the mountain, like a cable car that you can go up to the plains, you know, and walk around up there. So I loved that. And then I did the New York to Montreal trip. And then I came home. I kept getting trapped. You see, I'd come home, have to stay in a motel, run out of money, then I'd have to go away again. And so the last time I left New York, I think I was pretty loaded at the end of the ship, and then once on the cruise ships, I freaked out on the cruise ships, and I sort of had a nervous breakdown, and from, you know, being so lonely, and everybody thinks it's so wonderful, but it's like jail, and I see it now with these care homes, but you know, and I had the best of the best, I guess, but I started, after seeing that, I forget what happened anyway. I got so pissed off finally at that ship. I started drinking heavy once, and I was down in my room, and I thought, I just can't do it anymore. It was the booze that was doing that, and the depression. I thought, I can't go up there. I don't want to go. And so I freaked out and never went. And then I just said, I can't do this anymore. I got to go home. And so this was after 6-7 years or whatever it was. And so they took me to the doctor's office who, you know, I sort of knew all the people on that ship. And I kept drinking even when I was in the doctor's office. The nurse sat with me up there. And then when they took me to New York, they dropped me off to fly home, and they put me in Bellevue, which is the crazy house, which is like where one flew over the cuckoo's nest. And I think I told this story before too, but anyway, there was guys with machine guns in their garden. They had a red line you're not allowed to cross, and there's guys with guns in there, and it's serious. And they interviewed me. I said, I'm not crazy. I'm just depressed. I want to go home to Vancouver, you know. I'm a Canadian. And I phoned Angela, who I knew in New York, and she came down and talked to them. Thank God for her. And so they finally let me go. I said, if you go home, you can go. That's the same thing that happened to me in L.A. So I said, okay. So they didn't deport me, though. So I got on the plane, flew home, and went to a detox when I got home. And I can't remember what happened after that. If I got out the detox, I went to one in Maple Ridge once for 30 days, too. But I got out, and then I ended up going on a cruise ship again. I took a trip to Europe, and I wasn't drinking. This is after, I think, though. But what happened is I went to one more cruise I took was the Mexico Ensenada Catalina on Carnival, and I got on that ship and I absolutely hated it. I was in a room, double room, well, two single bunk beds with this big fat Mexican guy who had his friends in there all the time. You couldn't iron your clothes. There was no room. It was like a cramped room. You couldn't do your laundry. They wanted you to use the passengers' laundry facilities. You could never get up there. They were always busy. And I remember that guy, he never washed his clothes. His suit stunk from sweating. I hated it. And so anyway, on that ship, I ended up freaking out again and refused to come out of my room. This is twice that happened to me. Then I knew I was in trouble. So they locked me in my room. I told the staff captain off. I told this little gay guy off one time I was supposed to have a single room because I played a single Ricky's bar, the piano bar. And I still played the piano bar, but they gave me a double room with that guy. And anyway, so they made me stay in my room for like 2 days. And my roommate brought me. This was a different time. I had a different roommate that time. I guess maybe I did 2 trips on that trip, but the second time I had a different roommate. And he used to bring me booze, and I kept drinking all the time to the end. And then they kicked me off the ship, told me to get off. Okay, I said, fuck you, I'm getting off. I don't want to do this anymore. And I got off on the dock with all my equipment, and then the cops came and said, hey, you're not supposed to do this. You're supposed to go through immigration. I said, I was so screwed up, I didn't know what I was doing. And so they said, well, if we're going to let you go, we're deporting you. We'll let you go if you go to that airport, promise you're going there, and go home. And I said, okay, I will. Okay, so I went home, flew in on Christmas Eve. I know I told this story before, but I flew in on Christmas Eve and went and stayed at a hotel downtown. And I was so hungover, I was dying for a drink. And I had to wait till 9 o'clock in the morning. And I went to the St. Helens downtown on Granville Street, 9 o'clock in the morning, banged back a bunch of booze. Thought, what am I going to do now? And no place to stay, hardly any money. So I don't know. I think that's when I went to detox again and found out I left my damn Les Paul on the ship. My beautiful Les Paul. I forgot it. And so what happened is that, thank God, Carnival was nice enough to send my guitar back. I had to go through all these channels to find out. And they finally found it, and they sent it back to me free of charge. My Les Paul. That Les Paul has been all over the world. It's been to all over the States, many different states, all over Canada, every city nearly in Canada. It's been all over the Caribbean. It's been to Europe. It's been to Sweden, Germany, England. God, it's been everywhere. Mexico. Anyway, when I finished my Mexico trip with Carnival and ended up in detox up here, that's when I started. I had no place to live, and when I got out of detox, Bill Crompton had that apartment in Burnaby by Central Park, and so I moved in with him, and that's starting another chapter in my life, because that was the end of my cruise ship days. So I got to go, and if I can think of something else, I'll put it in. This is a strange story. I call The Shadow. Now, I've never been, well, when I was a kid, I went to school, I went to church a little bit in Nelson, like I said in my earlier thing, where I was in a choir, and I went to 2 or 3 different churches, and I was always interested in, well, science and religion, biology, and things like that all my life, but I never really went to church after Nelson when I was like 5, 6 years old. I didn't all the time in Sicamous. I never went to church or anything. And then when I was working on the cruise ships, it's a story about when I was down in the Caribbean. Now, the only other thing I ever heard about was something in Sicamous that it was like a will-o'-the-wisp or something years ago, that something had rolled across they saw it come down from the lily patch. It sort of rolled across the channel. It was like a big ball of flaming gas or something. It rolled on down through the swamp or something in Sicamous. And but I never saw that. I just heard about it. But anyway, this is a different story. This thing, I'll just read what I wrote. To start off with, I've never seen anything paranormal, like UFOs, nothing of that nature in my whole life, except on this one occasion. I was working as an entertainer on a cruise ship, singing and playing piano in a nice lounge. I did this for about 6 years with Regency Cruises. I was in the Caribbean. It was inside the Bermuda Triangle, but I don't know if that has anything to do with anything. But I wasn't taking drugs, and I wasn't drinking heavy at the time. I think I was. I might have been drinking one beer, I think, but I was between my first and second sets of the night, and I did 4 sets every night. It was like I played from 5 to 6. I think it was about after 6, so I'd only played 1 set. So I think I was having a beer or something. I can't remember, but I wasn't drunk, that's for sure. I had a whole night ahead of me to play. It was around, just after 6. I was sitting in my cabin, which is about 5 floors down on the ship. There's no windows or anything. I was having my first beer, waiting to go upstairs for my second set. When I saw, over my head, came from behind me, a black shadow came over my head, right over my head through the far wall of my room. And it was black. It had no discernible features. It looked like kind of like a human form with its arms stretched out or wings or something. It was like an ink black, like flat black. It was very weird looking. And it startled me so much I jumped off the bed. Whoa, what was that? I wasn't hallucinating. I never hallucinate. Even in my days where I drank heavy, partying and stuff, I've never ever seen any kind of hallucinations, ever. Never. And so it wasn't that. It moved me so much, I went to the other room where the other band was staying at, and they were in there having a drink or something, and told them what happened. They didn't believe me. They said, "Oh, come on over, have a drink." "Sure you did." Yeah, just like people do when you see a flying saucer or a UFO, which I've never seen. So I wasn't hallucinating, I know that. And I was kind of upset with this whole thing. I thought, geez, what the hell? It reminded me of a black, like a ghost or something, whoosh, right through my room. It was like really weird looking. And it wasn't like I didn't fall asleep. I didn't close my eyes and imagine it, because I've never imagined anything like that. So I went up on my way upstairs to play my next set. I stopped at the doctor's office because I knew the doctor. He was a nice guy there. And I'd been on the ship for quite a while, and he used to work there. We used to sit around, have coffee and talk and stuff. Told him what I saw. I said, I saw this thing go, a black shadow go right through my room. And I described him what it looked like. And he looked at me, he says, "Oh, Richard, I believe you." I said, "Yeah?" He said, "Yeah, come here, come with me." So he took me to the next room in his office, and there was a table there. There was a dead guy laying on the table with a cover over him, a body. And he lifted up the cover and said, "Oh, this guy just died about an hour ago." I just about fell over because I recognized the guy right away. He'd been coming to see me perform every night, and we'd sat the night before after and had a drink or something after the show at midnight. talked for a while, and he didn't say he wasn't feeling good or anything, but he was the guy that I knew. He'd been on the ship for a week or something like that. And the doctor said to me, yeah, I believe you. Something probably came to pick up his soul. And so the doctor said that to me, and I went, gee. So anyway, I went upstairs to perform my second set and was still kind of freaked out about this whole thing. I was telling the bartender about it, and this little guy that was his assistant that was working behind the bar got real excited and said, I saw the same thing. I said, well, I hadn't given him any details except that I said it saw a shadow. So I hadn't described what I saw, so I asked the kid what he saw, and the kid kind of described it the same way as I did. Now, but he was freaked out. The next day, the bartender told me not to talk about that shadow around the kid anymore because he was Catholic, and he was so scared that he was thinking of jumping off the ship or something. So after that, I studied as much as I could about black shadows and the shadow in the Bible that went there's a part in the Bible where God sends a shadow through the villages to kill all the firstborn baby in Egypt or something like that, because the Egypts, they wouldn't let the Jews go back to their Holy Land, and he caused the bug plague and all that stuff. But anyway, ever since then I started to get interested in black shadows, ghosts, and I've always been interested in stuff like that. But there's a nurse that I know, she used to see, she's at the care home where Marcia is, my wife, and she used to see black shadows around some of the old people when they died, and actually seen souls left out of the body. Lots of nurses have seen that. And golden ones around babies, like auras, when they died. And I've never had another experience like that, but I've seen actual, movies of things that do come out, the soul comes out of the body. But that was my story about the shadow that I saw. It was like so ink black and formless kind of, but it sort of looked like a long form with sort of outstretched arms or something, but it went just like right over my head through that wall. And that started me reading the Bible and studying even more stuff like that. So believe it or not. Here's a little footnote to my cruise ship days. I forgot to say, when Regency Cruises finished, I was playing on the ship that time, and we went from Bahamas, I think, down to Jamaica, or Puerto Rico down to Jamaica, to Montego Bay. And when we got there, there was all this news going around that Regency Cruises had folded. And I know I told this story before, but they had folded, and all the passengers were stuck there. And everybody on the ship's talking, what are we going to do now? What's going to go on here? Because they were supposed to, I can't remember how it happened anyway. So what they had to do is they had to fly all the passengers home to wherever they came from, because they went bankrupt, the Regency Cruises company. So anyway, we were stranded in Montego Bay for a couple of days. I don't even know if we were allowed to leave the ship. And then they decided they were going to go back to the Bahamas, and to Nassau. So we dead-headed all the way up there with no passengers. And the ship, then we got up to Nassau and docked there, and we were there for about a week trying to figure out what to do, how we were going to get paid. They owed us money, and I don't know, I remember going out. We didn't go out much. We went out once to a restaurant by the beach where all these sharks were swimming around, tiger sharks. I think Marcia told me once one of her husband's friends got eaten by those damn things. Anyway, we were stranded there, and the whole ship went all to hell because there was no power structure anymore, and there was like 60 people from I don't know how many different countries, lots of them, and from all down in the bowels of the ship where the workers lived, and so there was black people, Chinese people, I don't know, every kind of race, South Americans. They all started going a little bit haywire and stealing stuff, stealing TVs, stealing jewelry, breaking into people's cabins, and it got real dangerous and weird on there. And so I stuck in my cabin a lot, door locked, watching out for my stuff, my guitar and everything. And then what happened is we got word that they were going to pay us and fly us home. So that must have cost a fortune. But so we got off the ship in bunches and went to this cabin over there. They had a cabin. And same thing again, a couple of guards in there with machine guns and all this money piled up. Because on the ships, they used to pay in cash, right? I remember going in the purser's office once on the ship to get paid, and there was like stacks and stacks of cash. And they would put it in little brown envelopes and give it to each person that worked on the ship, you see. That's how I got my $2,000 stolen. Because a lot of these people couldn't go to banks normally, like normal people in all these weird little countries. You can't find banks. The only bank I noticed in all the Caribbean countries a lot was Bank of Nova Scotia. But anyway, there was these two guys with machine guns guarding the money, had all this cash there, and they paid us off. And then they got, I don't know, I can't remember, they took us to the airport anyway. A lot of people had jewelry and stuff stolen, but I didn't get anything stolen. But then we went to the airport and flew to Miami. I remember seeing the Hard Rock Cafe, I think it is, with a big guitar out there, and we went across a bridge and to some hotel, and they crammed us in this hotel. I don't know, we were in like 6 people in one room, and then the next day they flew me back to Vancouver. So that's just a little footnote about the ending of Regency Cruises. But after that, I did go on other cruise ships like Carnival, and I also did Princess up to Alaska, which I forgot to tell you. I had a job on that a couple of times. Once as a duo with Roger Stomperud, my friend. We had our own cabin together. We went up there on one trip, took a week up, week back or something. And then I did it by myself in a lounge in the front of the ship once, which was a rather boring gig. I don't think the boss liked me because I didn't play enough classical music or something. That was Princess Cruises. Alaska, we went to all the different places, Juneau, Ketchikan, Sayward. It was neat up there. I think Ketchikan is like a Russian city, or Sitka is, and the one place I think maybe it's Ketchikan. It's got the old town there with the boardwalk and by this river. I think it's Ketchikan, and it's got I think it's the Red Dog Saloon or something where the people crack all the peanuts and throw the shells on the floor, and it's like an old famous cowboy town, And I used to jog off the ships all the time and go for a jog and stuff like that. Sayward, and the Inside Passage was very beautiful. Going up there, it's like, I seen one of those white bears once, Komodo bears. And there's a lot of waterfalls and nice things to look at. So but it's like BC. I kind of like the Caribbean better. So that's my little footnote. I'm just going to do this little chapter here before I get going again. I'm listing some of the things that I've done in the past. TV shows. I did the Let's Go show with the Northwest Company 4 or 5, 7 times. And I did the Vancouver show with Pia Chandel back in my Holiday and Hollywood album days. I did that 2 or 3 times, which unfortunately I can't find the films for. I did a Vancouver TV show for Christmas once. I think Julia, my girlfriend, lined that up. I did a Rogers cable TV show at the Century Plaza Hotel in the Stanley Park Tea House interviews, and the Century Plaza was playing the piano and singing. I did the CFCN Miss Calgary pageant and the home cooking show out in Calgary. I was at the Junos where I was nominated for a Juno Award as Best Male Singer. Best New Male Vocalist, me and Bryan Adams and a guy from April Wine. He won, Bryan Adams didn't. I don't know if I forgot to do the thing about the Junos with my other thing, but anyway. And I did a Sicamous Christmas show up in Sicamous. I went up there when I had my Christmas album out and did a thing at the ice rink where I sang my Christmas songs. Radio interviews, I've done many. Calgary, Red Deer, Edmonton, Prince George, Kelowna, Winnipeg, Vancouver. I've done a lot. I've been in a lot of different newspapers. The Now paper in Vancouver. Many articles in newspapers from all over. Sicamous, my hometown, of course. Calgary, Edmonton. A lot of papers did write-ups about me, even in the Northwest Company. And the magazines, I was one of the luckiest guys in the world to be on the front cover of Billboard magazine. August 18th, 1979. I might have been in 2 different episodes, but I only have the date for the one, and I found it on the internet under Google Books. And I was in Record World, a write-up about me when Holiday in Hollywood was out. RPM magazine, I was also nominated on the RPM Awards, and I was nominated on the Juno Awards, and I won the PRO SOCAN Award for one of the top 10 songs in Canada, Holiday in Hollywood, which was on with Break It To Me Gently, Where the Lions Sleep, and Music Box Dancer with Frank Mills. So I won that also. The musical instruments I play are guitar, which I learned when I was 5, playing a slide guitar with a kitchen knife on a guitar, open-tuned. And then piano, I learned when I was, 7 or 8. I started playing piano. And the drums I learned when I was very young, too, 8 or 9. I started playing on shoe boxes and pots and pans. And I also play harmonica. And I also play banjo. I have a couple of different, one really good banjo, and I have a banjo guitar, but I play a little bit of banjo, too. But I've never really practiced it enough. But the bands that I've played in that I can remember right now are the Esquires, which was the trio from Sicamous when I was a kid. I auditioned for Little Daddy and the Bachelors in Vancouver, but I didn't get the gig. So I did play with them once. And the Questions I was in with Rick McCarty, Dave Rougeau, Adrie Van Viersen, Frank Babakife, and me. Northwest Company with all the guys in that band, Rick McCarty, Gowan Jorgensen, Ray O'Toole, Vidar Skoftaby, and myself, playing drums. Home Cooking with Ray O'Toole, Stan Bell, and Gordy Walker. Gordy what was his name? Gordy Panchitson. We also had Mike Vincent, Rosalind Keene, Irene Butler singing with that Home Cooking band. Then I played with a band called High Times, Doug Havens, Jim Fraser, and a drummer named Terry. Then I played in Shakedown. That was my band I started with Neil James, or Neil Harnett, I guess, Rick Clark, Allie, this girl named Allie, I forget her last name, Marshall Hunt, and George Chapless, and Ray O'Toole joined the band at one time, and Glenn Henderson. I forget what Allie's last name was, not McGraw anyway. She was a really good keyboard player. And the Richard Stepp Band, of course, which had myself, Nick Doctor, Mike Casper, Mike Hanford, and sometimes Peter Sweetser. Then I played with Richard and the Hired Guns, with I Dreamed I Died and Went to Heaven background singers, with had Al Forsyth on drums, Johnny Parker on bass, Bobby Regan on guitar, myself on guitar and piano, and that was not too long of a lived band, but it was a good band. An overview of my career was pretty well starting in Sicamous Esquires, and then, the different bands, coming to Vancouver, playing in bands, then go to New Zealand, come back, join the Northwest Company. Northwest Company releases a whole bunch of songs, including Rock and Roll Lover Man, which was my first song that I sang as a hit record with the Northwest Company. Then I released Chasing a Dream under Richard Stepp. Then I released Holiday in Hollywood with my own name, done in L.A. Then I released Richard Stepp. And since then I've done many, many recordings of the Dogwood series. I've done the Crompton series. I've done hundreds and hundreds of songs I recorded and wrote. Traveled all over the world in the cruise ships, all the different Caribbean islands, Mexico. I've been to New Zealand. I've been to Hawaii, Fiji. I've been to Germany, Sweden, England. Places I've recorded at in my life was CKNW with The Questions. That was a radio station. Psycord up in down on 4th Avenue, which was where Northwest Company recorded a bunch of songs and 45s with Robin Spurgeon engineering. Then PBS in West Van was a studio in West Van we recorded Rock and Roll Lover Man in, and a bunch of songs with Daryl Burlinghammer, Daryl B., and Fred Latrimo ran that thing. That's where I met Warren Beatty and Julie Christie. They were making McCabe and Mrs. Miller. There was a place called the Gold Rush Studios. I think it's on Arbutus Street. Mushroom Records on 7th Avenue, where I did Chasing Dream. Devonshire Studios in L.A., Sundown Studios in Calgary, in Edmonton. Sundown Recorders in Edmonton. Smooth Rock Studios in Calgary. There's a studio in East Van. I don't know what it's called, Crossroads. And then there was one in North Van called, I think it's called Greenbrier Studios. Or maybe I got them backward. Crossroads is in, anyway. Crossroads Studio I recorded, or Greenbrier Studios I recorded Step on a Steinway, which is my, that's a great album. Just me on piano. So it's on YouTube. And then I recorded at, I think it's the Gold Rush again with Lindsay Mitchell and Billy Cowsill. Lindsay Mitchell from Prism and Seeds of Time he produced it and played guitar, and Billy Cowsill sang some of the backgrounds. Producers that I've produced me before, Daryl B., Fred Latrimo, a guy named Jay Telfer at Gold Rush, and Ralph Hanneman at Mushroom Studios, Andy DiMartino in L.A., Jim Gaines up in Edmonton. He was from Santana and all those bands that he did. He did Stevie Ray Vaughan and everything. Howard Steele, who did Pointer Sisters, and tons of people. I went through them before in my last chapter on my... I went through those guys' names on my Richard Stepp LP chapter. Wes Dacus, Gay DeLorme, Barry Allen, people that I worked with like that, Jimmy Haskell, the arranger, Sid Sharp, the string man, the engineer Ron Malo at the Devonshire Studios. I already went through Bar Harbor, and so Catalino. Different managers I had were in the past were Daryl B., Ronnie Tomato, which is Ron Graham, Brian Cassidy, and I guess those people from Alberta, McKinnon's, and maybe Andy DiMartini, who kind of managed me. Art I've done in my life. I started drawing and painting when I was a kid in Nelson, and I painted and drew when I was in Sicamous. I liked biology, and I drew pictures, and I used to draw pictures of planes and boats and cars. Then I did one of my first paintings on the Queen of the North, I painted a picture. A guy, an artist that was on there doing demonstrations, sort of helped me, and I did a nice picture. And Tony O'Regan, who's a famous artist from Vancouver, I took painting lessons from him. And then I messed around by myself with painting. I painted in watercolors and acrylics. I did a portrait of Tony O'Regan. I did a portrait of Marcia, my wife. Now, famous people I've met, here's a list. I think I'll do this separate, okay?